One ordinary man, one room full of killers, and a 7-year-old girl waiting for her father to come home. Tonight, in the heart of Boston, an assassin is loading his weapon inside a ballroom filled with the most powerful people in America. His target? The youngest female CEO in the country. And the only thing standing between her and a body bag is a janitor with a mop, a secret that could shake the foundation of the U.S. military, and absolutely nothing left to lose. What happens next will change both their lives forever, and prove that the most dangerous man in any room is the one nobody ever saw coming. If this story gets you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit like, stay until the end. Because this is the kind of story you don't walk away from halfway through. The Meridian Grand Hotel had a way of making people feel small, not in a cruel sense. More like the building itself had been designed specifically to remind every person who walked through its brass and glass doors that the world contained levels of wealth and power that most human beings would never touch. The lobby alone was 3 stories tall, wrapped in Italian marble and lit by a chandelier that cost more than Nathan Cross earned in 4 years. Maybe 5. He had never actually done the math, because doing the math would have made him angry, and being angry was a luxury he couldn't afford on a Tuesday night with a shift that started at 7. Nathan pushed his cart through the service entrance at 6:52 p.m., nodding at Gerald from the kitchen staff, who was sneaking a cigarette by the loading dock. "Big night," Gerald said, exhaling sideways. "Every night's big night when you work here," Nathan said. Gerald laughed. Nathan didn't. It wasn't that he was humorless. It was that he was tired in the particular way that single parents get tired, the kind that lives in your bones rather than your eyelids, the kind that 8 hours of sleep won't fix because the exhaustion isn't about sleep at all. It's about carrying everything alone and knowing that tomorrow you'll have to carry it again. He signed in, clipped his badge to his chest, and started his route. The gala was in the grand ballroom on the 2nd floor. Some technology conference. Nathan had seen the banners going up for 3 days. Innovation Summit, building a safer digital future. Lots of very serious-looking people in very expensive suits had been filing in since 5 o'clock. Nathan's job was to keep the service corridors clean and handle whatever the floor supervisor radioed in. Spilled champagne, broken glass, the occasional mess in the men's room that nobody wanted to talk about. He didn't mix with the guests. That was understood, not stated. Men like Nathan Cross, quiet, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that made people instinctively step out of his way without knowing why, were part of the infrastructure, like the pipes behind the walls. Necessary, invisible. He preferred it that way. At 7:15, he stopped near a service door that opened onto the ballroom's east corridor and checked his phone. One message from Mrs. Diaz, his downstairs neighbor, who watched Lily on work nights. "She wants a bedtime story, the one about the fox again. I told her you'd call at 9. Nathan typed back, "Tell her 9 sharp. Tell her I love her." He stared at that last sentence for a second before he sent it, the way he always did. Not because he doubted it, because saying it in a text message felt inadequate for what he actually meant, which was closer to, "You are the only reason I am standing in this building instead of somewhere much darker. You are the reason I chose this. All of this. The badge, the mop, the quiet. You." He put the phone back in his pocket and pushed the cart forward. Isabella Sterling arrived at the Meridian Grand 40 minutes late, which was, by her own standards, practically early. Her assistant, Marcus, had been texting her since 6, each message progressively more stressed. She'd been in a call with her legal team that ran long, then a separate call with a federal cybersecurity consultant that she couldn't get off, because what he was telling her was the kind of thing you didn't hang up on. She sat in the back of the car rereading her notes from that call while the city scrolled past the window. Numbers, contracts, names she recognized, names she didn't. The picture they painted was not a comfortable one. Sterling Cybersecurity had grown faster than anyone expected when Isabella founded it 6 years ago at 24. What started as a boutique security consulting firm had become one of the primary contractors for federal cybersecurity infrastructure, the invisible architecture that protected financial systems, power grids, communications networks. Serious work. Important work. Isabella had built the company on a single principle: honest security. No backdoors. No quiet agreements with government agencies to look the other way. Transparency or nothing. That principle had recently made her some enemies. She had discovered, over 18 months of internal audits and careful, quiet digging, that several competing firms had been selling deliberately compromised security software to federal clients. They were getting paid twice, once for the contract and again by private entities who used those backdoors to extract data. The scale of it was staggering. The people involved were not small names. She had given herself 60 days to compile everything cleanly before going public. She was on day 47. The car stopped. Marcus was waiting outside with an umbrella, even though it wasn't raining. "You look terrible," he told her. "Thank you, Marcus." "I mean, professionally. Your lipstick is fine." "Good to know." She took a breath, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the entrance. "Who's in there that I need to talk to?" Senator Hale's chief of staff, 2 people from the DoD Oversight Committee, and Reginald Forsyth from Apex Defense Solutions. Isabella slowed her walk just enough that Marcus noticed. "You want me to run interference on Forsyth?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I want to see what he does when he sees me." Reginald Forsyth saw her from across the room. He was 58, silver-haired, with the kind of face that belonged on a Senate confirmation hearing, practiced calm, deliberate warmth, the permanent expression of a man who had learned that appearing reasonable was more powerful than actually being reasonable. He ran Apex Defense Solutions, the largest private cybersecurity contractor in the country. He had built his career on government relationships, strategic timing, and the careful cultivation of people who owed him favors. He watched Isabella Sterling work the room for 7 minutes before he said anything to the man standing beside him. The man's name was never spoken aloud in these settings. He went by Carver, which was not his real name, but had been his name long enough that he no longer thought of himself any other way. He was 44, former private military, and currently employed in a capacity that did not appear on any payroll. "She's here," Forsyth said, not looking at Carver. "I see her." "The timeline moves up." "By how much?" Forsyth lifted his champagne glass slightly, like a toast. "Tonight." Carver said nothing. He set his own glass on a passing tray, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the far side of the ballroom where 2 other men were waiting near a service corridor entrance. Nathan was on his second circuit of the East Corridor when he heard it. Not an explosion, not gunfire, just a shift in the atmosphere of a room. A change in the crowd's behavior that most people couldn't consciously register, but that Nathan Cross's nervous system had been trained over years of work in environments where missing it meant dying to read like a language. He stopped his cart near the service door and looked through the narrow window into the ballroom. 3 men, not together in the obvious sense, they were positioned separately, approximately 30 feet apart, in a rough triangle formation. 2 near the bar, 1 near the main exit. Dressed well. Badges on. But they weren't talking to anyone, and they weren't watching the speaker on the small stage near the north wall. They were watching the room. More precisely, they were watching one person in the room. The woman in the dark green dress near the center table. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair. Talking to a man in a gray suit, laughing at something he said, but her eyes, Nathan noticed this even from this distance, her eyes were doing their own scan. This was not a woman who had ever fully relaxed in a public space. Smart instinct. She just didn't know yet how right she was to have it. Nathan pulled out his phone and started to dial building security. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The ballroom's emergency lighting kicked on almost immediately, throwing everything into a flat, bluish half-dark. But in those 3 seconds of darkness, Nathan had already pushed through the service door into the ballroom, because he had seen the man near the exit reach inside his jacket, and he had recognized the motion with the particular clarity of someone who had spent a significant portion of his adult life watching for exactly that motion. The screaming started around the same time the first shot was fired. It was controlled chaos, the expensive kind, where people who had never been in genuine danger in their lives suddenly had to discover who they were under pressure. Nathan registered all of it in his peripheral awareness. People dropping to the floor, overturned tables, champagne flutes shattering, someone shouting into a phone. His primary focus was the geometry of the room, the locations of the three men, and the woman in the green dress. She had dropped low behind an overturned table. Good instinct. But the man from the exit was moving toward her position with professional steadiness, and the two men from the bar were spreading out to cut off the room's exits, triangle closing in. Nathan moved. He didn't run. Running created noise and drew attention from multiple directions. He moved the way he had been trained to move in confined spaces, fast, low, using the chaos of the crowd for cover, reading angles, always 3 steps ahead of where his feet were landing. He came around the right side of the overturned table just as the man from the exit got within 10 feet of Isabella Sterling's position. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Nathan hit the man from the side, driving his elbow into the throat with enough force to collapse the airway temporarily. Not lethal, but decisive. The weapon came loose. Nathan caught it before it hit the floor, assessed the safety, kept moving. He pulled the woman by the arm with his other hand. "Get up," he said. "Now, don't look at him. Move." She looked up at him. He expected fear. What he saw instead was something closer to rapid assessment. She was reading him the same way he'd been reading the room. He didn't have time to find that interesting. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but the other two are—" A table 5 feet away erupted with the impact of a bullet. "Moving toward us," he finished. "Service corridor, left of the stage. Go." She went. He followed, returning fire twice over his shoulder. Not to hit, because he couldn't confirm clean shots in a crowded room, but to create distance and redirect attention. Both men pulled back momentarily. It was enough. They hit the service corridor at a run, the door swinging shut behind them. The corridor was narrow and lit with the utilitarian brightness of a place that wasn't meant to be seen. Stainless steel walls, concrete floor, the smell of cleaning supplies and kitchen grease. Isabella stopped, turned, and looked at the man behind her. He was maybe 6 feet tall, solidly built, in a janitor's uniform with a name tag that said Nathan in block letters. He was holding a gun he'd taken from someone else, and he was breathing hard but controlled, and there was blood on his forearm that she was fairly certain was from a cut rather than a bullet wound, though she wasn't sure. "Who are you?" she said. "Nathan." "I can see that." She gestured at his name tag. "I mean, who are you?" "Right now, I'm the person who just pulled you out of a room. We need to keep moving." "There are 2 more of them." "I know." They were wearing event badges. "I know that too." She studied him for another second. The way he was standing, back slightly to the wall, gun at his side but hand tense, eyes moving between the door they'd come through and the corridor ahead, wasn't the body language of someone who'd stumbled into a crisis. It was the body language of someone running a crisis, which was a different thing entirely. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer it. "There's a freight elevator at the end of this corridor," he said. "Loading dock on the basement level. That's our exit. Your security team is in that ballroom, and so are the men trying to kill you. We separate you from both until law enforcement arrives." "And you trust law enforcement?" Something shifted in his expression. Not doubt. More like acknowledgement. "We secure you first. Trust nobody second. Those are the priorities right now." She pulled out her phone. He caught her wrist. "Don't. I need to call. If they have someone on the inside, your calls are being monitored. You make a call right now and you tell them exactly where we are." He released her wrist immediately, stepped back. "Please." She stared at him. Then she put the phone in her pocket. They moved. The freight elevator was old and loud and took approximately 1 geological era to arrive. Standing in the corridor waiting for it, Nathan could hear movement on the other side of the door behind them. Footsteps. More than one pair. "How many people knew you were going to be here tonight?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "The event was public." "Your attendance. How many people knew you'd actually show?" Isabella thought. "My assistant. 2 board members. The event organizers. My legal team knew I was in the city, but not where specifically." "Anyone you didn't personally trust with that information?" She was quiet for a moment. The organizers used an external coordination company. I didn't vet them personally. There it is. The elevator groaned and arrived. They stepped in. Who would want you dead badly enough to do this publicly? He asked as the doors closed. She looked at him steadily. How long do you have? We've got about 40 seconds before this elevator hits the basement. Short version, she said. I found something that implicates very large defense contractors in a systematic fraud scheme that also compromised federal security infrastructure. I've been building a case for 47 days. I have 13 days left before I go public. And they found out. Apparently. The elevator bumped and descended. Who specifically? Apex Defense. Probably 2 or 3 others operating under them. Nathan absorbed this. The name meant something to him, though he said nothing about it. You have the evidence secured? Encrypted. Multiple backup locations. They can't destroy it even if they... She paused. Even if they succeed. They're not going to succeed, he said. It came out flat. Not reassuring flat. Factual flat. The voice of someone stating a logistical reality. The elevator hit the basement. The loading dock was empty, which was either lucky or arranged, and Nathan decided to treat it as lucky because the alternative was a problem he'd deal with when it materialized. He moved Isabella to the far side of a row of steel shelving units stacked with event supplies, folded linen, stacked chairs, boxes of catering equipment. He positioned himself at the edge where he could see both the elevator and the exterior dock doors. Stay low, he said. You keep telling me things I'm already doing. Then I'll stop. She almost smiled. Almost. My name's Isabella Sterling, she said. I know. How? Your picture is on half the banners outside. He glanced at her. Sterling Cybersecurity. I read the program when I was cleaning the registration tables. Of course. She settled her back against the shelving. You really are a janitor. I really am. But you're not. He didn't answer. From upstairs came the sound of raised voices, then, unmistakably, a second shot. Then sirens, distant but getting closer. Boston PD response time in this neighborhood was good. Nathan had calculated it involuntarily when he first took the job here, the way he calculated things like that without choosing to. They're going to sweep the building, he said. All of it. Which means we either move now through the dock exits or we wait and identify ourselves to first responders. He turned to look at her. What do you want to do? What's the risk of waiting? If any of those men are connected to law enforcement or have any advance on which units respond, waiting puts you back in range. Small risk, but not zero. And moving? Keeps you off the grid until we know who to trust. She thought for exactly 2 seconds. We move. He nodded. He'd expected that. There's a car in the staff lot. Mine, he said. Nothing special, which is exactly what we want right now. Nothing special, she repeated, and something in her voice suggested that the concept was not entirely familiar to her. It has a full tank and no GPS tracking because the navigation system died 14 months ago and I haven't replaced it. He started moving toward the dock exit. Sometimes old cars are useful. Sometimes old janitors are useful, she said. He stopped. Looked at her. Nathan, she corrected herself. Sometimes Nathan is useful. He held the door open for her, and for the first time since the lights went out, something in his face that had been entirely closed opened by perhaps a fraction of a degree. Keep moving, he said. The parking lot behind the hotel was mostly empty at this hour, the remaining cars belonging to kitchen staff and late shift security. Nathan's 2011 Ford Ranger was in the third row, gray, with one side mirror that had been repaired with electrical tape and a small dent above the rear wheel well that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. He unlocked it. She got in without comment. He was around to the driver's side and pulling out of the lot in under 90 seconds, cutting through the back streets of the South End before the first police cruisers lit up the Meridian's front entrance on the far side of the block. He drove in silence for 3 minutes. Then, "You have somewhere safe you can go? Someone you trust absolutely?" "My attorney," Isabella said. "Clara Weston. She knows everything. She's not connected to the company." "Location?" "Cambridge. 20 minutes." He checked the mirrors. Clear. Call her from my phone. I'll dial. Don't use yours yet. Okay. He passed her the phone. She looked at it. A cracked screen iPhone that was 2 models old. My daughter uses it more than I do, he said before she could say anything. She likes the games. Isabella looked at the cracked screen, then at him. How old? 7. Where is she tonight? With a neighbor. Safe? Yes. She dialed. He drove. The city slid past in streaks of yellow and white light, and somewhere a few blocks behind them, the Meridian Grand Hotel pulsed with blue and red emergency light, and the night that Nathan Cross had built so carefully, quiet, invisible, small, was already gone. Clara Weston opened her front door in Cambridge wearing reading glasses and a look that said she'd been awake but hadn't expected company. When she saw Isabella's face, the glasses came off. Come in, she said immediately. Both of you. Her house was the kind of Cambridge house that accumulated books the way other houses accumulated dust. Every surface, every shelf, organized chaos that somehow suggested a precise mind rather than disorder. She brought them to the kitchen, which was the safest room according to Nathan's assessment. No front-facing windows, 2 exits. Tell me everything, Clara said, sitting across from Isabella. Isabella did. Nathan stood near the back door and listened to her account, which was precise and detailed and missing nothing. He was beginning to understand, extremely good at holding herself together under pressure. Not because she wasn't scared. He could see the way her hands weren't quite still, the way she'd consciously press them flat against the table every few minutes. But she didn't let the fear run ahead of her words. When she finished, Clara looked at Nathan. And you are? He works at the hotel, Isabella said. He's the one who got me out. I mean, who are you beyond that? Someone who noticed the right things at the right time, Nathan said. Clara looked at him for a long moment over her glasses. It was the sound of a woman who had been a litigator for 30 years and recognized when someone was answering a different question from the one she'd asked. She turned back to Isabella. I'm calling the FBI field office, not local PD, federal, and specifically the organized crime unit, not cybersecurity. Why not cybersecurity? Isabella asked. Because if this organization is sophisticated enough to infiltrate a private gala with 3 armed men on a week's preparation, I don't trust the cybersecurity channels aren't already compromised. She was already reaching for her own phone. We do this my way. Old school, paper trail. Isabella nodded. Then she looked at Nathan. You should go, she said. Your daughter? In a minute, he said. Nathan, I want to know who contacts you tonight and how, he said. After the FBI call, any name that comes up that you didn't personally put in motion. She studied him again with that same rapid assessment look. You think there'll be another attempt? I think tonight was the first attempt. That tells me they decided to move faster than they'd planned, which tells me they panicked, which tells me your evidence is closer to the surface than they're comfortable with. He met her eyes. Panicked people make mistakes, but they also escalate. Silence in the kitchen. Clara had her phone to her ear. The FBI connection was ringing. What's your number? Isabella asked Nathan. So I'll give it to you before I leave. He paused. I'm going to check the perimeter of this block first. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He walked out the back door. Clara watched him go, phone still to her ear, waiting for the connection. Then she said quietly to Isabella, Where did you find him? He found me, Isabella said. A pause, then into the phone. Yes, this is Clara Weston. I'm an attorney in Cambridge. I need to speak with someone in organized crime. Yes, I'll hold. She looked at Isabella. You all right? Isabella thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. That's the right answer, Clara said. Nathan stood on the back porch of Clara Weston's Cambridge house and let the night air hit his face. His hands were steady. They were always steady. That was one of the things his training had permanently installed in him, the physiological ability to keep his hands still even when everything else was running hot. But underneath that steadiness, something he had very carefully locked away was moving. Not panic, not exactly anger. Something more like the particular feeling of a door opening in a house you thought you'd sealed. He pulled out his phone, dialed. "Mrs. Diaz," he said when she picked up. "I'm sorry to call this late. Is Lily—" "She's asleep. She fell asleep waiting for your call. I'm sorry, No, that's good. That's good that she's asleep." He let out a breath. "I'm going to be later than I thought. There was an incident at the hotel." "Oh my goodness, are you—" "I'm fine. I'm completely fine. Would you mind staying until I'm back? I'll cover whatever you need." "Of course, Nathan. Of course. You're sure you're fine?" "Yes, ma'am." He hung up, stood there for another minute. 7 years of this. 7 years of quiet, of invisible, of nothing that would draw attention. He'd chosen a city he had no prior connections to. He'd taken a job where nobody looked at him twice. He'd built a life small enough to protect and simple enough to explain. He'd watched Lily grow from an infant who screamed at 3 in the morning to a 7-year-old who made up elaborate stories about foxes and insisted on choosing her own clothes even when the combinations were genuinely alarming. He'd thought he was out. And then 3 men with military training and professional equipment had walked into a hotel ballroom and reminded him that out was a story people told themselves because the alternative, that some things follow you regardless of how far you run, was too heavy to carry while also making lunches and doing bath time and reading stories about foxes. He looked at the cut on his forearm. It had stopped bleeding. He'd clean it properly later. He went back inside. The FBI arrived at Clara's house at 11:40 p.m. 2 agents, a woman named Reyes and a man named Park, who asked the right questions in the right order and didn't write anything down for the first 10 minutes, which Nathan took as a sign that they were paying actual attention rather than filling out a form. He answered what they asked. He was careful. When Agent Reyes asked him directly how he'd been able to handle 3 armed men, Nathan said, "I got lucky with the first one. The other 2 mostly just ran." She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who didn't believe a word of that but was choosing not to press it. "And your background, Mr. Cross?" "I clean floors at the Meridian Grand." A pause. "Before that?" "Various things." She wrote something down. He couldn't see what. Park was talking to Isabella and Clara in the next room. Nathan could hear the low rumble of their conversation without making out the words. Reyes closed her notebook. "We're going to need you available for follow-up, Mr. Cross. Don't leave the city." "I live here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him one more time, that same calibrated look that Clara had given him, that Isabella had given him. And then she nodded and moved on. Nathan waited until the agents were occupied with Clara's documents before he crossed to where Isabella was standing near the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of tea she hadn't drunk. "I'm going," he said quietly. She turned. "Okay. You're safe here tonight. Don't go home. Don't go to the office." "I know." "If anyone contacts you claiming to be law enforcement and you didn't get their name from Reyes or Park directly, "I know, Nathan." He stopped. "Right." She wasn't someone who needed basic instructions. He was aware of that. He wasn't sure why he kept giving them. She handed him a business card. He looked at it. Isabella Sterling, founder and CEO, Sterling Cybersecurity. Then flipped it over. She'd written a phone number on the back in small, precise handwriting. "My personal cell," she said. "Not the one on record anywhere. Clara has the number, but that's it." He put the card in his pocket. "Your daughter," she said. "What's her name?" "Lily." Something in Isabella's face shifted. Not pity, which he would have disliked, but something more like recognition, like she was filing it next to everything else she'd observed tonight, and it was landing with weight. "Go home to Lily," she said. He nodded. He walked out of Clara Weston's house, got back into his gray Ford Ranger with the taped side mirror and the dead GPS, and drove through the quiet Cambridge streets toward the apartment on the other side of the city, where a 7-year-old girl was asleep on a neighbor's couch, dreaming, probably, about foxes. He drove in silence for a long time. Then, At a red light on Massachusetts Avenue, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folded photograph. He didn't unfold it. He just held it in one hand while the light changed and the car behind him beeped because he hadn't moved, and then he put it back and drove. Some things you carry. You just learn how. He got back to the apartment at 1:23 a.m. Mrs. Diaz was awake in the armchair with a telenovela on mute. She looked up when he came in, looked at his face, and didn't ask any of the questions that were clearly occurring to her. "She's in her bed," she said. "I carried her in around 11. Thank you. There's rice on the stove if you haven't eaten." He hadn't. He ate standing at the counter while Mrs. Diaz gathered her things, because sitting down felt like something that required more of him than he had right now. After she left, he washed his arm properly at the kitchen sink. The cut was shallow, 3 inches, nothing that needed stitches, and pressed a folded paper towel against it while he stood in the hallway outside Lily's room. The door was half open. He pushed it the rest of the way. She was a dramatic sleeper, sprawled at a diagonal, one arm flung over the edge of the mattress, hair spread across 2 pillows as though she'd been deposited from a height. She was wearing the pajamas with the yellow stars, and there was a picture book still open on the floor beside her bed where she'd dropped it. He picked up the book, set it on the nightstand, pulled her arm back onto the bed gently. She didn't wake up. He sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, a siren. Closer, a dog barking twice and stopping. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Normal sounds, safe sounds. He had kept them safe. So far. He stood up, turned off the hall light, and went to stand at the kitchen window. The city was doing what cities do at 1 a.m. Not sleeping exactly, but quieter. The parts of it that showed its edges. He'd chosen this city because it was big enough to disappear in and small enough to understand. He'd learned its rhythms the way he'd learned the rhythms of every environment he'd ever operated in. Know where things are, know how they move, know the exits. He'd thought knowing the exits was enough. He looked at the business card on the kitchen table. Isabella Sterling, the handwritten number on the back. He thought about what she'd said. "I found something that implicates very large defense contractors." He thought about the name she'd said, Apex Defense Solutions, and the way it had landed in him like a stone dropping into still water, sending out rings he was trying not to look at directly. He thought about 3 men in a ballroom and the specific way they'd been positioned, not hired guns, trained. The first one, the way he'd moved, the way he'd held the weapon, that was a particular school. Nathan knew it because he'd come from an adjacent school, and you learned to recognize the graduates. This wasn't going to be one incident, one bad night that closed neatly when the FBI made a few arrests. He knew what escalation looked like. He'd seen it before, on the other side of it, when he was the one doing the escalating. When you sent 3 people and 3 people failed, you didn't stop. You reassessed, you rebuilt, and you sent more. He was going to have to make a decision. Not tonight. Tonight his daughter was asleep in the next room, and his arm hurt, and he hadn't eaten enough, and the rice from Mrs. Diaz was getting cold. He went back to the counter and finished the rice. He would think about the decision tomorrow, but somewhere, underneath the ordinary sounds of a quiet apartment and a sleeping child, something that had been dormant for 7 years was wide awake now, turning things over with the quiet, methodical focus that had once made Nathan Cross extremely effective at work that most people preferred not to know existed. It wasn't going back to sleep. He made the decision at 6:14 in the morning, standing in the kitchen in yesterday's clothes, watching Lily eat cereal. She was telling him something about a dream involving a fox who could speak 3 languages, and he was nodding in the right places, and somewhere behind his eyes he was running through every variable he'd spent the night cataloging. He hadn't slept. He'd sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold and a legal pad on which he'd written nothing, because writing things down had always felt like a commitment he wasn't ready to make, and because the thing he was turning over didn't require writing. He knew it already. He'd known it since the parking lot behind the Meridian Grand. The question wasn't whether the danger was real. 3 men with professional weapons in a hotel ballroom answered that clearly enough. The question was whether he could walk away from it. "Dad," Lily said. You're not listening." "The fox spoke Portuguese," he said, "and something else." She stared at him. French and Mandarin. I said that 2 minutes ago. You're right. I'm sorry. He sat down across from her. Tell me the part about the Mandarin again. She studied him with the particular suspicion of a 7-year-old who had learned to read her father's silences. She had a lot of practice. She had her mother's eyes, dark, direct, the kind that didn't let things go easily. And she was looking at him with them now in a way that made his chest do something complicated. Are you okay? She asked. I'm good, he said. You have a bandage on your arm. He'd forgotten to roll down his sleeve. I cut myself at work. It's nothing. Does it hurt? Not much. She seemed to weigh this. Then she went back to her cereal and after a moment resumed the story about the fox, and Nathan sat there listening with the full portion of himself he could spare, which was maybe 60%, and hated that it wasn't more. He called Mrs. Diaz after Lily left for school. Then he made a second call, one he'd been putting off since he sat down at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. The number rang 4 times before anyone picked up. Yeah, said a voice. Flat, careful. It's Cross, Nathan said. Silence. Then, Jesus. I need a conversation. You need a pause. The sound of a door closing on the other end. Nathan, the last time I saw you, you were walking off a base in Virginia and nobody knew where you went. That was 7 years ago. I know. I thought you were dead. I know that too. Another pause, longer. Where are you? Boston. I need to talk to someone who knows what Apex Defense Solutions is currently running and who's running it. The name landed on the line like a dropped weight. Nathan heard the shift in breathing on the other end, the slight change in rhythm that meant the other person was recalibrating. Apex, said the voice. That's not a small ask, Nathan. I know what it is. Why? Something happened last night. I saw something on the news about a shooting at a hotel in Boston. Then you know what kind of conversation I'm asking for. The pause this time was long enough that Nathan almost said something to fill it, which was unusual for him. Then the voice said, Give me 48 hours, same protocol as before. I don't use that protocol anymore. Then use a burner and text me this number. A beat. Don't call from whatever phone you just called from again. The line went dead. Nathan set the phone down on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then he went to the closet in his bedroom, moved aside a box of Lily's old clothes he'd been meaning to donate, and removed a flat case from behind it. Inside the case was a phone he'd bought for cash 18 months ago and never activated. He activated it now. Then he sat back down at the kitchen table and thought about a man named Carver, and about Apex Defense Solutions, and about a door he had walked through last night that he wasn't going to be able to walk back through the other way. He thought about Lily saying, Are you okay with her mother's eyes? He called Isabella. She picked up on the second ring, which told him she hadn't slept either. You're up, he said. I've been up since 4. Her voice was steady but tight at the edges. The FBI came back this morning. Reyes. She wants a full briefing on the evidence structure. Who has access to the backups, what the encryption architecture looks like. That's good. That's what should happen. She also told me they found the 3 men from last night. Nathan waited. 2 of them were already gone, disappeared before the police secured the building. The third one, she stopped. The third one was found in a service stairwell. He'd been shot, single round, different caliber from anything fired in the ballroom. Nathan was quiet for a moment. They cleaned up their own. That's what Reyes said, which means someone else was in that building. Someone whose job was to make sure nobody left anything traceable. Yes. A pause. Nathan, that's a level of operation that... I know what level that is. She was quiet. He could hear her breathing. Then, who are you? You asked me that last night, and you didn't answer. I answered enough. Not enough for this, she said. If I'm trusting you, and I apparently am trusting you, which I'm still processing, then I need to know what I'm trusting, not your whole history, not your personal details, just enough to know whether you actually understand what we're dealing with. He considered this. Outside the kitchen window, a pigeon landed on the fire escape railing and regarded him without interest. I was SEAL Team 6, he said. 6 years. 2 combat deployments, 3 covert operations that don't have official names. I left 7 years ago after a mission that went sideways in a way I wasn't willing to sign off on. I built a clean identity, moved cities twice, and settled here. A pause. That's enough. The silence on her end was different now. Not surprised. She'd seen him move. She'd seen what he did with 3 armed men in the dark. She'd known there was something, but knowing and hearing it out loud were different. Apex Defense, she said finally. You recognized the name last night. It wasn't a question. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Apex had overlapping interests with some of the operations I ran, he said carefully. I don't know the specifics of what they're doing now, but I know the type of people they employ and I know what they're capable of. So you understand that last night wasn't an accident or an amateur operation? Yes. And you're still calling me? Yes. Another silence. Why? He thought about it honestly. He could have given her the practical answer, that he was already involved, that walking away wasn't actually safe, that his best option for keeping Lily protected was to be inside the problem rather than adjacent to it. All of that was true. But the honest answer was simpler and more uncomfortable. 3 men had walked into a room intending to kill a woman because she'd spent 18 months doing the right thing. And Nathan Cross, who had spent 7 years convincing himself that other people's right things were not his problem, had looked through a window and felt something wake up in him that was apparently not as dead as he'd believed. Because somebody should, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she said. Then I need to show you something. Can you come to Clara's? Give me an hour. He hung up, went to the bedroom, opened the flat case again and looked at what else was in it. A folded piece of paper with 3 phone numbers, none of which he had called in 7 years, and a photograph of a man he had once trusted completely and then stopped trusting on a specific night in a specific country that he still dreamed about occasionally. He left the photograph. He took the paper. He changed his clothes, told the building super he'd be in and out over the next few days, and drove to Cambridge in the gray Ford Ranger, which was low on wiper fluid and had a rattle in the dashboard that he'd learned to stop hearing. Clara's kitchen table had become a war room. Not officially. It still had the same stacked books on one end and the same chipped ceramic fruit bowl that held nothing but a pen and 3 rubber bands. But Isabella had spread a structured layer of printed documents across the remaining surface, organized with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been awake doing this since 4 in the morning, which she had. Sit, Clara said, appearing from the hallway with a coffee pot. Nathan sat. Clara poured without asking. He didn't object. Isabella was standing at the table's edge, arms crossed, looking at the documents the way she probably looked at code. Not reading it exactly, more like holding the structure of it in her head and checking it for gaps. This is what I have, she said. Not all of it. Most of it is still in the encrypted backups. But this is the shape of it. She tapped a section of printed pages. Apex Defense Solutions holds 11 federal contracts for cybersecurity infrastructure. 6 of them involve what's called passive monitoring architecture, systems that run in the background of critical networks and flag anomalies. Backdoors, Nathan said. They're not designed as backdoors, but they can function as them if the architecture includes an undisclosed remote access pathway, which Apex's does. I found it in month 4 of the audit. She moved to another stack. The access pathway is being used by a private data broker, shell company registered in Delaware, parent company in the Caymans, to extract financial and communications data from federal systems. Not everything. Surgical pulls. The kind that are hard to notice unless you're looking at traffic patterns over time. Which you were. Which I was. She looked at him. The broker sells the data. To whom, I haven't fully mapped, but there are strong indicators pointing toward 2 categories of buyers: competitive intelligence clients, mostly foreign adjacent, and political opposition research. Clara set her coffee mug down with a sound that expressed her feelings about this without requiring words. How much money? Nathan asked. The contracts themselves are worth about $400 million over 5 years. The data brokerage income, based on what I can infer from the transaction patterns, is likely comparable, possibly more. He let that number sit for a moment. Forsyth, he said. Reginald Forsyth runs Apex. He's the public face, but I think there are at least 2 other principals operating at the same level who don't appear in any public documents. She moved to a 3rd section, a printed network diagram with names connected by lines of varying thickness. This is as far as I've gotten on the ownership structure. Nathan studied the diagram. Several names meant nothing to him. 2 did. He pointed at one of them, a name written in smaller text near the edge of the diagram, connected to Forsyth's name by a thin dotted line. Victor Hale, he said. Isabella looked at him sharply. I thought he left federal service in 2016, she said. He left official federal service. That's different. Nathan straightened up. He ran a Joint Intelligence Private Sector Coordination Unit out of the DoD for 4 years. The unit was shut down officially. The relationships it built weren't. He looked at her. If Hale is connected to this, your problem is bigger than one company. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator. How do you know that name? Isabella asked. Because I worked a mission that his unit coordinated. Once. He didn't say anything more about it. She looked like she wanted to push, then decided not to. Clara had been listening from the counter. She set her mug down again. So what we have is a federal contractor using compromised security architecture to run a parallel intelligence operation connected to at least one former senior DoD official willing to send armed men to a public event to stop the exposure. She paused. Nathan, in your professional assessment, and I'm asking because you clearly have a professional assessment, what do they do next? He appreciated that she asked straight. They don't stop, he said. Last night was improvised. They moved faster than planned because something spooked them. Probably something in Isabella's movements or communications that suggested the timeline was accelerating. That means they have a contingency structure they're now activating. He looked at Isabella. They'll try again, more carefully. And they'll also go after the evidence, not just you. They'll try to identify every backup location, every person who might have access to your files. Clara, Isabella said immediately. Probably. Marcus, your assistant, depending on what he knows. Potentially your attorney of record, though Clara is not formally connected to the case. He paused. Your family. Isabella's jaw tightened. My mother is in Portland. Does she know what you've been working on? No. Has she contacted you recently? Calls, texts, anything on a device connected to your accounts? She texted me last week. That's enough for them to flag her as a connection point. He was trying to say this plainly without making it worse than it was. I'm not saying she's in immediate danger. I'm saying you should get someone you trust to make contact with her through a channel that isn't linked to you in the next 24 hours. Isabella looked like she'd been told something she'd already known but hadn't wanted to confirm. She pressed her palms flat on the table, that gesture Nathan had noticed at Clara's house the night before. The small, physical act of forcing herself to stay grounded. Okay, she said. What else? Your security infrastructure at the company, who designed it? I did, mostly, with my CTO. Your CTO is named? David Park. He's been with me since year 2. He's clean. I'd stake everything on it. Has he been briefed on the investigation? No, I kept it compartmentalized. He knows there's an audit happening, but not the scope. Brief him today, partially, enough that he can identify any anomalous access attempts on your systems without knowing the full picture. You don't want him knowing everything right now for his own safety. She nodded, already processing. He could see her building lists in her head, the same way she'd built the diagram on the table. She ran a cybersecurity company. She knew how to think about threats architecturally. He just needed to give her the right frame. Your physical security, he said. You have a team? 2-person detail, both vetted by a firm I've used before. Pull them off. She blinked. What? If Apex has any access to the security industry's personnel networks, and they likely do, your details' identities are findable. More importantly, your details assignment tells anyone watching exactly where you are. For the next period, you want to be unpredictable. He leaned forward slightly. I know this is counterintuitive. Having visible security makes you feel protected. But visible security is also a broadcast signal. Clara spoke up. She can stay here. For some of the time, but not in a pattern. You can't sleep in the same location 3 nights in a row. He looked at both of them. I can help coordinate the movement. I know how to build a rotation that doesn't broadcast. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then, you do that. I'm already doing it, he said. I've been doing it since I pulled you out of that ballroom. I'm just asking if you want it to be official. She looked at him across the table of documents. He looked back. He was aware that he was offering something with a cost he hadn't fully calculated. Not to Isabella, but to Lily, to Mrs. Diaz, to the quiet, small life he'd assembled around his daughter's safety. He was aware that he was doing it anyway. Okay, Isabella said. Official. Clara picked up her coffee mug. I'll call the FBI again. Reyes said she'd have an update by noon. She left the kitchen. Nathan and Isabella were alone with the documents. Your daughter, Isabella said after a moment. If this escalates, if they trace anything back to you, does she have somewhere she can go? He hadn't expected her to ask that. Most people, even good people, forgot to think 2 levels out when they were in the center of their own crisis. She has an aunt in Vermont. My sister. He said it before he'd fully decided to say it. They've never met. That's the point. Isabella understood immediately what that meant. That he had maintained his sister as a clean contact, never connected to his current life, precisely for a situation where he needed somewhere safe that nobody could find. How long can she stay? As long as she needs to. Does she know about your background? She knows I was military. She doesn't know the rest. A pause. She's never asked. He thought about his sister Marie, who lived in a small town outside Burlington and taught 8th grade science and called him every couple of months and talked about her students and her garden and never pressured him about anything. He had chosen not to tell her things to protect her. She had chosen not to ask, he sometimes thought, to protect him. You'll need to move her soon, Isabella said. I know. Before anyone makes the connection. I know. He stood up, moved to the window. The Cambridge street outside was doing its regular morning business. A dog walker, a woman with a stroller, a man in a delivery uniform coming out of the building across the way. Normal. Ordinary. The surface of things. I'll handle Lily today. There was a pause. I'm sorry, Isabella said, that this is happening. He turned from the window. She was looking at him with something honest on her face. Not pity, not the professional sympathy of someone managing a crisis resource. Something more personal than that, and less comfortable. Don't be sorry, he said. Be ready. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. I'm ready. He almost said something else. He wasn't sure what. The moment passed. Clara came back into the kitchen looking like she had something to say that she wasn't entirely happy about saying. Reyes called back early. They've identified one of the 2 men from last night, the ones who got away. And, Nathan said, he's former Army, Ranger qualified, 6 years active, 2 private military contracts after discharge. She paused. He's currently on the payroll of a security firm called Titan Group, which is a subsidiary of Apex Defense Solutions, Isabella said. Yes. Nathan turned back to the window. The delivery man across the street was getting back in his truck. The dog walker had stopped to let the dog investigate something at the base of a mailbox. Everything ordinary. Everything as it should be. How long before they come again? Clara asked. Not afraid, practical. They're already planning it, Nathan said. The question is where and when. He turned around, which is why we're not going to sit here and wait for them to decide. He picked up his jacket from the chair. I need to make a call, he said. And then I need to go get my daughter. He walked out the back door for the second time in 12 hours, and this time he was already dialing before he hit the bottom step, the burner phone warm in his hand, the number he hadn't called in 7 years now ringing somewhere he couldn't picture, toward a voice he hoped was still on the right side of things, because the alternative was a problem he didn't have a plan for yet, and he needed to deal with one problem at a time. The line connected. It's me, Nathan said. I need what you know about Titan Group and their current personnel structure. And I need to know if the name Victor Hale appears anywhere in what you've been watching. A long silence. Then the voice on the other end said something that made Nathan stop walking in the middle of Clara's small backyard, because it confirmed what he'd been afraid of since he first saw the name on Isabella's diagram. He stood there for a moment with the phone against his ear and the morning light coming over the tops of the houses around him, and he made the second decision, the one that mattered more than the first one, because the first one was about whether to get involved, and the second one was about whether to go all the way. He went all the way. "Okay," he said into the phone, "tell me everything." The man on the other end started talking. Nathan listened with his eyes open and his hands still, the way he'd been trained to receive information in situations where the information would require immediate action, cataloging it in the precise, systematic way that his brain had never fully stopped doing, even during 7 years of being a janitor and a father and a man who drove a truck with a dead GPS and read Fox stories at bedtime. He listened, and he understood, and somewhere under the ordinary morning sounds of a residential street in Cambridge, something shifted into place with the quiet, irreversible finality of a lock turning. When the call ended, he went back inside. Isabella and Clara were both watching him. "We have a problem," he said. "Bigger than the one we already have?" Clara asked. "Different. Victor Hale isn't just connected to Apex." He set the burner phone on the table. "He's been running operational security for their data brokerage for 2 years, which means the federal investigation into what Isabella found, the one Reyes is running, has a significant chance of being compromised from inside." The kitchen absorbed this. "Reyes," Isabella said slowly. "I don't know if Reyes is dirty. I don't think she is. But Hale has people in the Bureau infrastructure, not necessarily agents, but administrative and technical personnel who can redirect information, flag queries, and report upward to him." He looked at both of them. "Which means we can't assume any digital communication with the FBI is fully secure." Clara put her coffee mug down very carefully. "So what do we do?" Nathan thought about the man on the other end of his call. He thought about what had been said, and the particular way it had been said. The careful phrasing of someone who was giving information they maybe shouldn't have, because they still believed in something underneath all the compromise and complication. "We build a parallel track," he said. "Isabella continues working with Reyes. That can't stop. Pulling away from federal contact right now would raise flags and potentially accelerate whatever Hale's people are watching for. But at the same time, we find a way to get the evidence to someone who isn't in the compromised chain." "Who?" Isabella asked. "I'm working on that." He looked at her directly. "Do you trust what you have? Is the evidence solid enough to survive without you?" She understood what he was asking, but not whether she would survive, but whether the case would. "Yes," she said. "If it reaches the right people in the right form, it stands on its own." "Then that's what we protect," he said. "You're important. The evidence is more important. We keep both safe, and we find the path to the right people." He picked up his jacket again. "I need 3 hours," he said. "I have to get Lily to Vermont, and I have to do it in a way that doesn't look like what it is." 3 hours, Isabella said. "Then what?" "Then we figure out how to stop waiting for these people to come to us." He looked at her one more time. This woman who had spent 18 months building a case that most people would have walked away from in month 3, who had gone to a public gala knowing she was a target because showing up was part of not letting them win, who had held herself together through a night that would have unraveled most people and was already, at barely past 9 in the morning, thinking about the next move. He understood something about her that he hadn't put into words until now. She was not going to be safe as long as she was passive. She was the kind of person for whom safety had to be forward-facing, not defensive. He'd known people like that. He'd been one. 3 hours, he said. "Don't go anywhere without telling me first." He walked out. The drive back across the city was heavier than the drive in. He kept the radio off and the windows cracked and thought about how to say to a 7-year-old girl that she was going to take a trip to Vermont to meet her aunt and make it sound like a good thing, which it was. It was genuinely a good thing. Lily would love Marie, and Marie would adore Lily. without it sounding like what it also was, which was her father choosing, for the second time in her short life, to walk toward danger while she watched from a distance she didn't fully understand. The first time she'd been an infant. She wouldn't remember it. This time she was 7. She would notice. She would ask questions. She would watch his face for the answers he didn't put into words, because she was her mother's daughter, and she had always been better at reading him than he was at reading himself. He gripped the steering wheel. He was going to keep her safe. He was going to keep Isabella safe. He was going to find the path through this and emerge on the other side, and then he was going to take Lily out for the breakfast he'd been promising her for 3 weeks. The diner on Commonwealth, with the absurd pancakes she'd seen on a menu, and fixated on with the particular intensity that 7-year-olds reserve for things that mattered to them completely. He was going to do all of that. He just had to get there first. The rattle in the dashboard started up again as he turned onto his street. He reached out and thumped it once, in the specific spot that usually quieted it, and it went quiet, and he pulled into his parking space and sat for a moment before getting out. Then he went upstairs to pack his daughter's bag, and to be, for a few more hours, just a father. Marie Cross lived in a house that smelled like wood smoke and old paperbacks, at the end of a dirt road outside Burlington that Google Maps got wrong about half the time. She was 41, with the same dark eyes as her brother, and considerably more willingness to show what she was thinking with them. When Nathan pulled up in the Ford Ranger at 2 in the afternoon, she was already on the porch. She'd known he was coming. He'd called from the burner, using the code they'd established years ago without ever formally establishing it. A specific sequence of small talk that meant something other than what it sounded like. He'd asked about her garden. She'd said the tomatoes were late this year. That was enough. She came down the porch steps when Lily climbed out of the truck. "You must be Lily," she said. Lily looked up at her with the evaluating expression she used on all new people. "You look like my dad." "I get that a lot," Marie said. "He's my little brother." "He's not little." "He was. You should have seen him at 7. She glanced at Nathan over Lily's head, a brief exchange that contained approximately 40 things neither of them said. Then she crouched down to Lily's level. "Are you hungry? I made soup." "What kind?" "Tomato, from the garden." Lily considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "Okay." Marie took her inside. Nathan stood by the truck for a moment, looking at the tree line at the edge of the property. Quiet up here. The kind of quiet that had texture, wind in the leaves, a bird somewhere, the distant sound of a tractor on a neighboring property. He'd forgotten this kind of quiet existed. He took the bags from the back seat and went inside. Marie's kitchen was warm and cluttered in a way that felt intentional. A collection of coffee mugs on an open shelf, a stack of papers on one end of the table that was obviously always there, a corkboard covered in photographs and notes, and a few student drawings that her 8th graders had given her. Lily had already installed herself at the table and was examining a small potted plant with focused curiosity. "Is this a cactus?" Lily asked. "Aloe," Marie said, stirring the soup. "If you burn yourself, you break off a piece and put the gel on it. It helps." "Does it actually work?" "Mostly. Better than nothing." Nathan set the bags by the door. "She has enough clothes for a week. Her school has—" "Nathan," Marie's voice was even. "I taught middle school for 12 years. I can manage one 7-year-old. I know. Do you?" He stopped, looked at her back because she was facing the stove. "Yes," he said, quieter. She ladled soup into a bowl and put it in front of Lily with a piece of bread and didn't say anything else about it. After lunch, Marie showed Lily the back garden and the small greenhouse she'd built the previous summer, and Nathan watched through the kitchen window while they moved between the beds. Lily was talking. He could see it from the movement of her hands, that gesture she got from her mother of speaking with her whole body. And Marie was listening with the particular quality of attention she'd always had, the kind that made people feel like what they were saying was the most interesting thing she'd heard all week. He washed the soup bowls. He dried them. He put them away in the wrong cabinet, realized it, moved them to the right one. Marie came back in alone. Lily was visible through the window, crouching over something near the greenhouse. "She found a caterpillar," Marie said. "We'll be here a while." "Good." Marie sat down at the table. "Tell me." He sat across from her. He told her, Not everything, because some of it she didn't need and some of it would scare her in ways that wouldn't help anyone. But he told her enough. The hotel, Isabella, Apex, the name Victor Hale, which meant nothing to Marie but which she wrote down anyway on the corner of a piece of paper because she seemed to understand it mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know. A week, maybe 2. Could be less. And if it goes longer, then I'll call and tell you. From a number I won't recognize." "Yes," she nodded slowly. She doesn't know why she's here. She thinks it's a visit. What do I tell her if she asks when you're coming back? Tell her soon. He held Marie's gaze. Tell her I always come back. His sister looked at him for a long moment. She had always known more about him than he'd officially told her. That was the thing about people who paid attention. They assembled the picture from the edges, even when you kept the center hidden. "You left this behind," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation that also happened to be a question. "I thought I did." "And now?" He looked out the window at his daughter, who was holding something on the end of a stick and showing it to nobody in particular, narrating to herself the way she did when she found something genuinely interesting. "Now I have to finish it first," he said. Marie followed his gaze to Lily. "She's going to be fine here." "I know. I mean, she's going to actually be fine. Not perform fine for your benefit. She'll be upset when she realizes the visit is longer than a weekend, and then she'll find something to be interested in, and it'll carry her through." A pause. "She has your capacity for absorption. When something takes her attention, it really takes it." Nathan looked at his daughter for another moment. "She has her mother's eyes," he said. "But sometimes I see, she concentrates like I do." He said goodbye to Lily near the greenhouse, crouching down to her level the way Marie had done, looking at her directly. "I have to go back to Boston for work," he said. Lily's face moved through several things. "How long?" "Not long. Aunt Marie's going to take good care of you." "I know that." She said it with a mild impatience that meant she'd already assessed Marie and found her acceptable. "I just asked how long." "Soon," he said. "I'll call every day." She studied him. She did the thing with her eyes, the looking, the reading. He tried to keep his face honest without being frightening, which was a narrower space than it sounded. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I'm working on making it okay," he said, which was the truest thing he could give her. She appeared to weigh this. Then she leaned forward and hugged him around the neck, and he held on for a count of several seconds longer than necessary, and then he let her go and stood up before he did something she'd find confusing. "The caterpillar's going to be a monarch," she told him. Marie said, "That's a good one to be," he said. He got in the truck. He did not look in the rearview mirror when he pulled out of the driveway, because he knew if he did, he'd see Lily standing by the greenhouse watching him go. And that was an image he needed to not be carrying in the front of his mind for what came next. He looked anyway. She was standing exactly where he'd expected. She raised one hand. He raised his, through the window, and then he turned onto the dirt road and drove south. The drive back to Boston took 3 hours with traffic, and he used them. He called the contact from the burner, the man he'd spoken to twice now, whose name was Garrett and who had once been a DoD signals analyst before a bureaucratic dispute that he described simply as a difference of professional ethics had relocated him to a less official capacity. Garrett was one of 3 people from Nathan's previous life that he'd maintained careful, intermittent contact with. He was also the one most likely to know who, outside the compromised federal chain, could receive Isabella's evidence and actually act on it. "Senate Intelligence Committee," Garrett said without preamble when Nathan asked. "Specifically the Minority Council. She's been building her own parallel investigation into defense contractor irregularities for 8 months, completely off-network, paper documentation, in-person meetings only. Her name is Adrienne Cole. She's the one you want." "Can you reach her?" "I can reach someone who can reach her. It'll take 48 hours minimum." "Do it." A pause. "Nathan, what are you walking into here?" "Something I should have walked into a long time ago, probably." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." He merged onto the highway. "Make the contact. I'll be in touch." He made 2 more calls before he hit the city limits, both logistical, both from the burner. By the time he parked outside Clara's house in Cambridge, it was nearly 6 in the evening, and the sky was doing the particular thing it did in late autumn, going dark faster than you expected, as though the light had been there a moment ago and then simply decided not to be. The kitchen table now had a second layer of documents on it, and Agent Reyes was sitting in one of the chairs looking like someone who had been having a very long day and expected it to get longer. She looked up when Nathan came in. "Mr. Cross," she said. "Agent Reyes. We need to have a more thorough conversation than we had last night." "I thought we might." He sat down. "Go ahead." She pulled out a notepad. Nathan noticed she was using a pen rather than her phone. Either personal preference or she'd had someone suggest to her that digital notes on this case were not ideal. He took that as a reasonably good sign about her. "Your background," she said. "I ran what I could find, which wasn't much. What I did find was interesting. I imagine. Navy service, 7 years, and then nothing. No address, no employment records, no tax filings for 2 years before you reappear in Boston with a Massachusetts ID and a job at the Meridian." She looked at him over the notepad. "People don't disappear like that without help or without reason." "Both," he said. "Which was it for you?" "Both." She studied him. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Cross, because I don't have time to be anything else. Last night you neutralized a professional security threat in about 4 seconds, which tells me you have a very specific kind of training. This morning I ran the name Apex Defense Solutions through 3 different internal databases, and 2 of those queries got flagged before I had results back." She paused. "Flagged meaning someone inside the Bureau infrastructure was monitoring for those search terms." Nathan kept his face neutral. "What did you do with that?" "I took my query offline, paper only from this point." She tapped the notepad. "Which is why I'm here in person." She looked at Isabella, then back at Nathan. "Someone is running surveillance on this investigation from inside. I don't know who. I don't know how deep it goes. What I do know is that I need to work around it, and I think you 2 know things that would help me do that." Nathan glanced at Isabella, who gave him a small, clear nod. He turned back to Reyes. "Victor Hale," he said. Reyes wrote it down without reaction, but her pen moved with the deliberate quality of someone controlling a reaction rather than not having one. "Say more." "Former DOD ran a Joint Intelligence Private Sector Coordination Unit until 2016, currently operating as an undisclosed principal in Apex's brokerage structure. He has administrative and technical contacts inside federal law enforcement. Not necessarily agents, but people positioned to redirect information and flag queries." He paused. "People like whoever flagged your search." "How do you know this?" "A source I trust." "I'll need that source." "Not yet. When we're further along and I'm confident the channel is clean, yes. Right now, no." Reyes looked at him steadily. Another person might have pushed back on that. She seemed to assess it as a reasonable security posture rather than obstruction. "Okay, what else?" He told her about Garrett's contact. Not Garrett's name, but the existence of Adrienne Cole in the Senate Intelligence Committee's Minority Counsel office and the parallel investigation she'd been running. Reyes listened and wrote and didn't interrupt, which Nathan found increasingly reassuring. She was a good listener. She prioritized information over the performance of authority. "Cole's investigation and mine," Reyes said when he finished. "If we coordinate through a channel that doesn't touch Bureau infrastructure—" "You build a case that doesn't have Hale's fingerprints on it," Isabella said. She'd been listening from across the table, and she spoke with the precision of someone who'd been holding a thought and waiting for the right place to put it. "Clean chain of evidence separate from anything that's been exposed." "Which means my original evidence documentation is still the core," Nathan said, "but it reaches the right people through the right path." "How long to build that path?" Reyes asked. 48 hours to establish the Cole contact. After that, it depends on how fast she can move." "Apex isn't going to give us 48 hours to reorganize quietly," Reyes said. "They already know last night failed. They're going to be reassessing." "I know." Nathan folded his hands on the table. "Which is why we need to talk about what happens when they try again." The room was quiet for a moment. "You think they'll come here?" Clara said from the counter. She'd been in the room the whole time, contributing nothing, which Nathan had noticed meant she was absorbing everything. I think they'll come wherever Isabella is. Here, the company offices, wherever else she's been in the last 48 hours. He looked at Isabella. We need to move you. To where? Somewhere they haven't seen you go. Somewhere with controlled access and no established pattern. He thought for a moment. A hotel, not the kind you usually stay in, mid-range, cash transaction, registered under a name that isn't yours. I can arrange that, Reyes said, through a channel that doesn't touch the compromised infrastructure. Do it tonight. Isabella was watching him with that look again, the rapid assessment look, the one that had started in the ballroom when he'd pulled her up from behind an overturned table. He was getting used to it. It didn't feel like scrutiny anymore. It felt like she was checking whether he was still the same as he'd been the last time she looked, which he found he didn't mind. There's something else, she said. Everyone looked at her. The New York Summit, she said. It's in 6 days. The Global Technology and Security Conference at the Harman Center. I'm a keynote speaker. I've been scheduled for 4 months. She paused. I can't cancel it. Clara opened her mouth. Clara, Isabella said, I know what you're going to say. Do you? That it's too exposed, too public, that we should call off any public appearances until this is resolved. She looked at Reyes. But if I disappear from public view entirely, what does that signal? Reyes answered honestly. That you're scared and that the pressure is working. Exactly. And Apex sees that, and they know they have time, and they use it to shore up their position before the evidence reaches anyone who can act on it. She sat back. The summit is a cybersecurity conference. My speech is about transparency and accountability in federal contractor relationships. I was going to use it as a precursor to going public, build the narrative before the disclosure. She looked at Nathan. I still want to do that. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. You understand what you're describing, he said. You're describing walking into a public venue in another city, in front of hundreds of people, when there are professional operators actively trying to kill you. Yes. With 6 days to prepare security. Yes. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since 4 this morning. She held his gaze. I need you to tell me if it's possible. Not safe. I'm not asking for safe. I'm asking if it's survivable with the right preparation. Nathan looked at the table. He thought about the Harman Center in New York, which he'd been in once 7 years ago, under entirely different circumstances. Large venue, multiple entry points, underground loading access, significant CCTV coverage, but also significant crowd density, which cut both ways. He thought about what 6 days of preparation could and couldn't accomplish. He thought about what Apex would do when they found out she was still planning to appear publicly. And they would find out. That was the thing about a public conference with 4 months of advanced scheduling. The guest list wasn't a secret. Survivable, he said finally. If we control the variables, we can control and build contingencies for the ones we can't. That's what I needed to hear, Isabella said. Don't mistake it for comfortable, he said. It's not. I don't need comfortable. I need possible. Reyes had been listening to this exchange with the expression of someone recalibrating her understanding of who exactly she was dealing with. If she goes to New York, she said to Nathan, what do you need? Advance access to the venue, building schematics, staff rosters, a way to embed 2 or 3 people I choose in the event security without it appearing on any official documentation. He paused. And I need to know if you can coordinate with NYPD through a channel that doesn't run through anything Hale might be watching. I have a contact in NYPD counterterrorism, personal relationship, nothing official. He owes me a conversation. That's a start. What about you? She asked. What's your official capacity here? Because right now you're a janitor who's been operating as a de facto security director for 24 hours. And if something goes wrong in New York, give him a capacity, Isabella said flatly. She looked at Reyes. Whatever paperwork makes it clean. Personal security director for Sterling Cybersecurity, retroactive to yesterday. I can't just... You're asking what his official capacity is. I'm his employer. I'm telling you his capacity. Isabella didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Is there a problem with that? A beat. No, Reyes said. No problem. Nathan looked at Isabella. He thought about saying something about the fact that she'd just hired him without asking, but it occurred to him that she had technically just solved the problem Reyes raised, and he didn't have a better solution. He let it go. They worked for another 2 hours at Clara's kitchen table. Reyes left at 8:30 with a list and 2 phone numbers and the demeanor of someone who had come in expecting to run a standard witness protection protocol and was leaving with a significantly more complicated assignment, which she appeared to regard as a professional challenge rather than an imposition. Clara made tea nobody asked for, and everyone drank. At some point around 9, Isabella's phone buzzed. She looked at it and her expression changed in a way that was small but visible. Marcus, she said. My assistant. She looked at Nathan. He says 2 men came to his apartment this afternoon asking about my schedule. The kitchen went quiet. He didn't answer the door, she said. He watched through the peephole and didn't answer. He's been in his apartment since. She was working to keep her voice level. He's scared. He should be, Nathan said. Call him. Tell him to pack a bag tonight. Enough for a week, and to go to a specific address that I'm going to give you. Don't use your phone to send the address. Tell it to him verbally right now. She was already dialing. Nathan wrote an address on a piece of Clara's notepaper, a location he'd identified that afternoon during one of his logistical calls, a place where Marcus could be secured without connecting to any of the established locations in this situation. Isabella relayed it quietly to Marcus, who appeared from his responses to be the kind of person who, when faced with a crisis, wanted specific instructions rather than reassurance, which was useful. She hung up. He'll go tonight, she said. Good. She put the phone down, pressed her palms flat on the table. Nathan had been watching this gesture since the first night at Clara's, the small physical act of grounding herself. And he'd started to understand it not as fragility, but as the opposite. She knew when she was close to the edge, and she had developed a physical mechanism for pulling herself back. That was not a small thing. They went to Marcus, she said, which means they're mapping my network, every person connected to me. Yes. How many people are on that list? Depends on how much time and how many resources they're committing. He said it plainly, because she'd asked for plain. Could be 20 people, could be more. I have 23 full-time employees, she said, plus contractors. Your employees aren't in significant danger unless they have access to the evidence. They're looking for leverage points and information pathways, not eliminations. He paused. The people close to the evidence are different. That's me. David Park. Clara. Reyes. You. She looked at him. And now Marcus, because he knows my schedule well enough that they think he's useful. Yes. She absorbed this. He watched her process it. The way she moved through shock and into calculation, not cleanly, not without the shock leaving marks, but moving nonetheless. Okay, she said. What's the plan for the next 6 days? He'd been building it in his head since he got back from Vermont. Tomorrow, we go to your company offices. I need to walk the physical space, assess the security infrastructure, and have a direct conversation with David Park. I'll need to tell him enough that he knows what to look for, without telling him so much that he becomes a target. Okay. The following 2 days, we build the New York protocol. Venue access, personnel placement, contingency mapping. Reyes's NYPD contact is part of that. He looked at Clara. You stay out of New York. I wasn't planning to go to New York, Clara said dryly. Good. You're the backup. If anything goes wrong with the primary evidence chain, you have copies of the core documents. You know how to reach Adrian Cole if the direct channel gets disrupted. Clara nodded, with the manner of someone who found this assignment slightly terrifying and was going to do it anyway. Day 5, we run a dry approach on the Harmon Center. I walk the space as a civilian, map the actual layout against the schematics, identify every variable the blueprints don't show. Day 6. He paused. Day 6 is the summit, Isabella said. Day 6 is the summit. She held his gaze. And then? And then it either works or we deal with whatever happens. She almost smiled at that. Not quite. That's not much of a plan for the end. The end isn't the part you plan, he said. The end is what happens when all the planning runs out. Clara had been listening with her tea mug halfway to her mouth. She lowered it. That's a profoundly unsettling thing to say. It's an honest thing to say, Nathan said. The kitchen was quiet again. Outside, Cambridge had gone fully dark, and the streetlight through the window made a rectangle on the floor that the cat, appearing from nowhere, immediately occupied. Isabella was looking at her hands on the table. When I started this audit 18 months ago, she said, I knew it was going to get complicated. I told myself I was prepared for that. She paused. I wasn't prepared for this. Nobody is, Nathan said. Were you? When you were doing whatever you were doing before you were a janitor? He thought about it honestly. You prepare for specific scenarios. You can't prepare for the actual thing, because the actual thing is always different. The preparation is what keeps you functional when the thing arrives, but it doesn't prevent the thing from being harder than you expected. Has this been harder than you expected? He looked at her. Ask me in 6 days. Something in her expression shifted, not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. The face of a person who was frightened and resolved and tired and not planning to stop, all at the same time. 6 days, she said. He nodded. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and said goodnight to Clara, who told him to be careful in the tone of someone who knew the instruction was insufficient, but was giving it anyway. He walked out through the back door for what he was beginning to think of as his habitual exit from this kitchen, and the night air hit him at the bottom of the steps, the same way it had the night before. And he stood for a moment in the dark and thought about New York. He thought about the Harmon Center's layout, which he was reconstructing from memory. The main hall's seating, the secondary conference rooms, the service access, the areas where sight lines collapsed and crowd density made movement unpredictable. He thought about what a professional team would do with 6 days of preparation and the knowledge that a target was walking into a public space. He thought about Carver, whose face he hadn't seen in the ballroom, but whose operational signature he recognized in the way the attack had been structured. Carver was good. He was meticulous, patient, and he did not accept failure as a terminal condition. He treated it as a data point. He thought about Lily in Vermont, who was probably asleep by now in Marie's spare room, surrounded by books and the smell of wood smoke, dreaming about monarchs and foxes and 3 language-speaking animals, innocent of all of this in the way that 7-year-olds were innocent, not because the world wasn't dangerous, but because someone was standing between her and the danger, which was the only kind of innocence that was ever real. He pulled out the burner, sent a single text to Marie. She get to sleep okay? The response came back in under 2 minutes. Out cold. She talked about the caterpillar for 40 minutes first. She's fine. He put the phone in his pocket. He went back to his car. He drove the Cambridge streets toward the hotel where Reyes was arranging a room under a name that wasn't his, because going back to his own apartment tonight would be the kind of predictable that he couldn't afford anymore. He parked. He sat in the dark for a moment. 6 days. Dozens of variables. A woman who refused to stand down. A conspiracy built from money and protected by violence. And himself. A man who had walked away from this world once and was now walking back into it. Not because he was built for it, though he was, not because he was good at it, though he was, but because the alternative was watching someone do the right thing and get killed for it, and he had apparently not yet become the kind of person who could watch that and keep his hands still. He got out of the car and went inside. He did not sleep well, but he slept. The 5 days between Boston and New York were the kind of days that compressed time in both directions, moving too fast in the practical sense, every hour eaten by logistics and planning and the specific exhaustion of sustained vigilance, and too slow in every personal sense, because slow meant thinking, and thinking meant Lily in Vermont and the photograph in the glove compartment and all the things Nathan had put away in sealed rooms inside himself that were beginning to leak around the edges. He didn't let it show. He'd been trained not to let it show, and that training was the kind that didn't switch off, which was useful professionally and had historically been a problem in every other context. He functioned. He planned. He moved Isabella through the rotation of locations they'd established. 2 nights at the hotel Reyes arranged, 1 night back at Clara's, movements timed and varied enough that no pattern emerged. He ate when he remembered to. He slept in intervals that were technically adequate. He called Lily every evening at 8 from the burner keeping the calls to 10 minutes because longer meant she'd start asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. She told him about Marie's greenhouse and a book she'd found on Marie's shelf about deep-sea creatures, and a neighbor's dog named Pretzel, who had very strong feelings about squirrels. She sounded okay. More than okay, actually. She sounded absorbed, which was what Marie had predicted, and which was both a relief and its own small, complicated hurt, because it meant she was adapting to his absence with a competence she shouldn't have had to develop. He called on day 4, and she said, unprompted, "I know you're doing something important." He was quiet for a second. "What makes you say that?" "Because you always sound like that when something's important," she said. "Your voice gets quieter." He hadn't known that about himself. "I'm okay," he said. "I know," she said, with the patient confidence of someone who had decided to believe it and wasn't interested in being argued out of it. He held the phone for a moment after he hung up, sitting in a parked car on a side street in Cambridge in the dark, and did something he hadn't done since she was 2 weeks old, and he'd been alone in a hospital waiting room in a city he didn't live in anymore. He put his face in his hands and just breathed. 30 seconds. Then he put the phone away and went back inside to finish planning New York. The Harmon Center occupied a full city block in Midtown Manhattan, a glass and steel structure built in the early 2000s that had the architectural confidence of a building designed to host important things and the practical layout of a building designed by committee. Nathan spent his dry run day on the 5th day walking every public corridor, every accessible service route, every area where the floor plans he'd obtained diverged from physical reality. And they always diverged, because floor plans reflected intention and buildings reflected the thousand small decisions that got made during construction when intention met budget and physics. He found 4 discrepancies that mattered. A service corridor on the building's east side that the schematics showed as ending at a loading bay, but actually continued another 40 feet to a second exit onto the cross street. A ceiling access point in the main hall's green room that wasn't on any documentation he'd seen. A gap in the CCTV coverage on the 3rd floor mezzanine that created an unmonitored pocket approximately 20 feet wide. And a secondary electrical panel tucked into a maintenance alcove near the north stairwell that could affect the main hall's power independently of the building's primary grid. He photographed all of it on the burner, sent the photos to himself, sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Harmon Center for an hour, and rebuilt his mental map of the space with the corrections. Then he called Reyes. "The ceiling access in the green room," he said. "I need someone in it before the event starts. Someone I trust." "I have 2 people from NYPD counterterrorism," she said. "Both vetted outside the compromised channel. Torres and a guy named Webb. They've been briefed at the minimum level. Tell Torres the ceiling access. Webb on the east corridor. The one that goes to the cross street. Neither of them is visible during the event. They'll push back on that. They're used to being on the floor." "Tell them the floor is mine," Nathan said. "If they want to protect the principal, they do it my way." A pause. "Okay. Anything else?" "The electrical panel by the north stairwell. I want it physically locked, and I want the key held by whoever your contact is in building management, not event staff." "Done." "And Reyes?" "Yeah. If anything comes through the bureau channel tonight about this event, anything at all, I want to know about it, even if it seems routine. You think they're going to try to use law enforcement infrastructure to create an opening. I think they've done it before. I think they're capable of coordinating a response that looks official until it isn't." He paused. "Just tell me if you see anything unusual." He hung up and sat with the coffee he hadn't touched until it went cold, looking at the window of the coffee shop and the midtown street beyond it, the city doing what New York did, refusing to be anything other than completely itself at all times, dense and indifferent and relentlessly alive. He thought about Carver. In the 5 days since Boston, Nathan had assembled what he could about the man through Garrett's channels, fragments mostly, the kind of picture you got from sources who each had a piece but no one had the whole thing. Former private military, British special forces before that, disciplined, methodical. Operated in small teams that he selected personally and trained to a standard higher than most private contractors bothered with. His record of engagement in the last 8 years included 3 confirmed operations that had been attributed to accidents or unrelated criminal activity. He did not fail often. When he did, he recalibrated rather than repeated, which meant he wasn't going to try Boston again. He was going to try something different in New York, and it was going to be better prepared than the first attempt. Nathan spent the evening in his hotel room, sitting cross-legged on the bed with the printed schematics spread around him, building Carver's plan from the outside in. What would he do with 6 days of preparation and knowledge that the target was attending a public event? He'd map the venue. He'd identify the choke points, the coverage gaps, the moments where crowd density and event logistics created natural confusion. He'd place people before the event started, staff badges, probably, obtained through whatever access Apex's resources could buy. He'd planned for multiple contingencies because Carver was the kind of operator who assumed his first move would be countered. Nathan built the plan. Then he built the counter to the plan. Then he built the counter to the counter, which was the part that kept him awake until 2 in the morning, not because he couldn't figure it out, but because every version of the counter to the counter required him to be in a specific place at a specific moment, and there was only one of him. He picked up the phone and called a number that wasn't Garrett's. The man who answered had been out of the Navy for 3 years and was currently doing private security consulting in the Mid-Atlantic region. His name was Dooley, and Nathan had worked with him for 4 years and trusted him in the specific, calibrated way you trusted people you'd been in dangerous places with. Not blindly, but with a clear-eyed understanding of exactly what they were capable of and where their limits were. "I need someone in New York tomorrow," Nathan said. "Day job is event security. Real job is covering 2 positions I can't cover myself." A pause. "How bad is it?" "Professional operators, well-resourced. They've already tried once." "What kind of money?" "Whatever you want." Another pause, shorter. "I'm in Philly right now. I can be there by morning." "The Harmon Center. I'll meet you at 7. He hung up. Then he lay back on the hotel bed with the schematics on the blanket around him and closed his eyes. And this time he actually slept, because he'd done what he could do tonight, and tomorrow required him to be functional. And Nathan Cross had a long-established capacity for sleeping in situations where sleeping seemed inappropriate. He dreamed about the parking lot of the Meridian Grand, not the ballroom, just the parking lot and his gray truck and the drive away from it. And for some reason in the dream, Lily was in the back seat, even though she hadn't been there, saying something he couldn't hear. He woke at 5:30, showered, dressed, and went to meet the day. Isabella arrived at the Harmon Center at 9:15, 40 minutes before her scheduled speaker registration, in a car arranged by Reyes that wasn't connected to her company accounts. She was wearing a dark blazer and the particular expression of someone who had decided exactly who they were going to be today and was holding it in place with both hands. Nathan met her at the side entrance. "How are you?" he asked. "Ask me in 4 hours," she said, the same answer he'd given her in Clara's kitchen. She remembered. He could tell by the small, deliberate quality of how she said it. "Fair," he said. "Walk with me." He walked her through the parts of the venue she needed to know. Not all of it, because she didn't need the full tactical picture. She needed the practical one. Where to stand during the speech for maximum sightline coverage, which exit to move toward if he gave her a specific signal, what the signal was, the green room layout where she'd wait before taking the stage. She listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions, all of them precise and logistically specific. She did not ask whether everything was going to be fine, which he appreciated, because he couldn't have answered that in good conscience. Dooley was already inside when they got to the green room, standing near the catering table with the relaxed posture of a man who was not relaxed. He was 40, medium height, with the kind of unremarkable face that was useful in security work, the sort that didn't catch in people's memories. He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back. "Ms. Sterling," Nathan said, "this is a colleague of mine. He's part of your security today." Isabella looked at Dooley. "What do I call you?" "Dooley," he said. "Just Dooley." "It's enough." She seemed to accept this. She sat down in the green room chair and pulled out her phone to go over her speech notes, and Nathan stepped aside with Dooley. "East corridors covered," Dooley said quietly. "Webb's positioned and he's competent. Torres is in the ceiling access. He was unhappy about it, but he went. The mezzanine gap? I put myself there during the open registration period. 2 men came through who didn't match the event profile. Suits were right, but movements were wrong. I tracked them to the main hall and flagged them to event security for badge verification. And? Their badges checked out. A pause. Which could mean they're legitimate late registrants, or it means the badges are very good. Nathan thought about this. Where are they now? Lost them in the hall crowd, maybe 10 minutes ago. Descriptions. Dooley gave them. Nathan filed them in the specific mental cabinet that was already organized by location and potential vector. If it starts in the hall during her speech, the stage is the kill zone, Nathan said. Getting her off the stage fast is the priority. Not off the stage and into the wings, off the stage and into the service corridor behind the north wall. I've pre-staged that route. And if it starts before she gets on stage? Then we're in the green room with one entrance and a ceiling access. Torres is overhead. We hold until Reyes can move law enforcement in from the perimeter. What if the law enforcement perimeter is the problem? Nathan looked at him. Then we improvise. Dooley nodded, with the manner of someone who had worked with Nathan long enough to know that when he said improvise, he had already thought through several specific versions of what that would look like. Marcus was in the building too, which Nathan had not planned but had not been able to prevent. Isabella's assistant had apparently decided that his job included attending his employer's keynote speech regardless of the circumstances, and had shown up at the side entrance at 8:30 with his conference badge and a messenger bag, and the slightly brittle composure of someone who'd been frightened for 4 days and was managing it by insisting on normalcy. Nathan had looked at him for a moment and then let him in, because sending him away would have required an argument that would have taken time he didn't have, and also because Marcus appeared to be, despite everything, someone who was useful in a room, observant, organized, the kind of person who noticed things and didn't make noise about them. Stay in the green room until she's on stage, Nathan told him. Then go to the 3rd row, aisle seat, left side. Don't move from that seat under any circumstances unless I or Dooley physically come to you. What counts as a circumstance? Marcus asked. You'll know, Nathan said. He left them in the green room and went to walk the hall. The Global Technology and Security Conference had filled the Harmon Center's main hall with approximately 400 people, a mix of industry professionals, government representatives, academics, and journalists, all of whom had paid several $1,000s to attend, and most of whom were currently consuming the conference's breakfast buffet with the particular focused energy of people who had important meetings later. The noise level was the specific kind of conference hall hum that Nathan had learned to read as a baseline, the standard condition of a room not yet in crisis. He moved through it. He found the first man Dooley had flagged standing near the right side wall, apparently examining the conference program. He was mid-40s, square-shouldered, the suit fitting him in the way that suits fit men who wore them infrequently, slightly wrong across the back. Nathan walked past him at a distance of 6 feet and cataloged, no visible earpiece, but a small rectangular bulge under the left jacket panel that was too square to be a phone. The second man was at the back of the hall near the main entrance, talking to a woman Nathan didn't recognize. He was younger, early 30s, and he was better at appearing relaxed. Nathan watched him for 30 seconds from across the room. The conversation with the woman looked natural, but his weight distribution was wrong. He was balanced forward on his toes in the almost imperceptible way of someone prepared to move suddenly. 2 confirmed. Probably more he hadn't found yet. He went back to the service corridor behind the north wall and sent a text to Reyes. 2 confirmed inside. Possibly more. Don't move law enforcement yet. It'll push them to act early. Hold perimeter. Respond on my signal. Her response came back in under a minute. Understood. NYPD has 4 plainclothes in the surrounding blocks. Signal received and held. He looked at his watch. 45 minutes until Isabella took the stage. He went back to the green room. She was standing when he entered, no longer looking at her notes. She was looking at the wall, which meant she was looking at something inside her head. They're in the hall, she said, before he could say anything. 2 confirmed. Possibly more. She turned. How do you want to handle it? You give the speech, he said. You don't change anything about your plan or your behavior. If they see a deviation, they may accelerate. He held her gaze. You walk out there and you do exactly what you came here to do. And while I'm doing that, I'm working the problem. She looked at him for a long moment. He noticed that she wasn't doing the hands flat on a surface thing right now. She was standing with her arms at her sides, weight even, looking straight at him with the dark, direct eyes that he had gotten accustomed to over 5 days of proximity, and which he was trying not to find anything other than professionally relevant. I trust you, she said. Not performing it, just stating it. The way she stated things she'd already decided. I know, he said. Don't make it harder than it needs to be by worrying about what I'm doing. Focus on the speech. Marcus made a sound from the corner that might have been a suppressed editorial comment. Nathan looked at him. Marcus arranged his face carefully. 30 minutes, Nathan said, and went back out. The next 30 minutes had a specific texture that Nathan recognized from the period before an operation goes live. The quality of time that feels thin, like the surface of something under pressure. He moved through the hall twice more, updating his map of where the 2 confirmed men were positioned, looking for the ones he hadn't found yet. He found a third. Service staff uniform, working the side entrance near the stage, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew the job but looking at the wrong things. Service staff looked at the people they were serving. This man was looking at the stage. 3 then, maybe 4, based on what Carver's operational pattern suggested about team size. He called Dooley. Stage side entrance, staff uniform. I need eyes on him while I cover the hall. Got him, Dooley said. The moment she's on stage, your priority is that entrance. If he moves toward the stage, you don't wait. Understood. Nathan positioned himself at the hall's left center, close enough to the stage to close distance quickly, far enough back to maintain sight lines to both confirmed positions. He was in the conference lanyard and the jacket he'd worn specifically because it had pockets that sat correctly, and he looked like approximately 400 other people in the room, except for the quality of stillness he maintained, which was different from the shuffling, shifting stillness of people waiting for a keynote. The light shifted. A conference organizer stepped to the podium, said some words Nathan didn't track. The audience settled. Please welcome to the stage. Isabella walked out. She was composed at the way that Nathan was beginning to understand was characteristic of her under pressure. Not the performed composure of someone suppressing panic, but the real composure of someone who had made a decision and was living inside it. She stepped to the podium, looked out at 400 people, and began to speak. Her voice was steady and clear, and carried the room without effort. She talked about transparency. She talked about the responsibility of companies that held the public trust and what happened when that responsibility was betrayed. She used precise language, not inflammatory, not dramatic, but the kind of specific documented language that left no room for ambiguity. Nathan listened to the first 2 minutes and then redirected his full attention to the room. The man on the right side wall had moved. He was closer to the stage now, still appearing to watch the speech, but with that same wrong quality of attention. Nathan tracked him and tracked the man at the back simultaneously, the way he'd been trained to maintain split focus. A skill that had always cost him something, because the brain didn't actually do 2 things at once. It switched very fast, and the switching had a price. At the 4-minute mark of Isabella's speech, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a partial outage. Complete darkness, instantaneous. The main hall plunging from bright conference lighting to nothing in under a second. The room reacted the way rooms react, a collective intake of breath, some startled sounds, one scream from somewhere near the back that was fear rather than injury. Nathan was already moving before the emergency lighting kicked in, because he'd been watching the right side man's body language, and the man had begun moving 2 seconds before the lights went, meaning he'd known it was coming, meaning it was coordinated, meaning the electrical panel Nathan had locked was either unlocked or there was a second point of access he hadn't found. The emergency lighting came up in that flat bluish half-dark he remembered from the Meridian Grand, and the sensation of repetition hit him with an almost physical force, the same ambient panic, the same geometry of a room in sudden crisis, the same need to find a fixed point in the chaos and move toward it. Fixed point. The stage. He was 12 feet from the stage when the first operative reached it from the other side. Not the right side man, a fourth man, one he hadn't identified, who had been positioned in the front row and who came over the low stage barrier with professional speed. Dooley was on the stage side entrance, which was the right call, but nobody had been on the front row. Nathan covered 12 feet in the dark at a dead run, hit the stage barrier, and came over it. What followed was the particular violence of close quarters work and poor lighting, with civilians in the immediate vicinity. Constrained, ugly, nothing like the way it was represented in any medium Nathan had ever seen. The fourth man was good. He was bigger than Nathan by 30 pounds, and he'd clearly closed distance expecting to have more time than he did. They went down together against the podium, which crashed sideways, and Isabella, who had stepped back from the podium at the first sign of movement, with instincts that impressed Nathan even in the middle of a fight, was against the back wall of the stage. Nathan got the upper hand at the cost of his left shoulder hitting the stage floor at an angle that would hurt significantly later. He came up from the floor and looked at Isabella. "North corridor, now, go." She went. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back, moved the way she'd been told to move. He followed, keeping himself between her and the hall. Behind them, he heard Dooley the specific sound of Dooley dealing with the stage side operative, which was not quiet but was efficient. He heard Torres somewhere overhead. He heard the hall's ambient panic shifting into the louder, more directed noise of people being instructed to move by voices with authority, which meant Reyes had read the signal and moved the perimeter in. The service corridor behind the north wall was dark, except for the emergency strip lighting along the floor. Nathan ran it with Isabella 6 feet ahead of him, maintaining the distance that let him see everything behind them while still being close enough to close on her instantly if needed. They hit the second junction in the corridor, and he said, "Left." She went left. 20 feet. A door. He had the key because he'd obtained it from building management 2 days ago. One of the many small logistical acts that didn't look significant at the time and occasionally turned out to matter. He unlocked it. They went through. The room was a building systems monitoring station, racks of equipment, a single overhead light on emergency power, 2 chairs, a desk with monitoring screens showing the building's environmental systems in real time. No windows. 1 entrance. Nathan pulled the door shut, locked it from inside, pressed his back to it and listened. Footsteps in the corridor, passing, moving away. He let out a breath. Isabella was standing in the middle of the room with both hands braced on the equipment rack. She was breathing fast, not panicking, recovering the way a body recovers from an adrenaline spike when the immediate threat is resolved. He could see her working to regulate it. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She looked at him. "You are." He was aware of his shoulder. "It's manageable." "It doesn't look manageable." "It's manageable," he said again. He pulled out the burner. "Reyes," she picked up immediately. "I have you on building tracker. You're in the systems room north side." "Yes, 2 of us. I need confirmation on the hall." Torres and Dooley engaged 2 operatives. 1 in custody, 1 down. Not fatally. 2 more fled through the east corridor. Webb is in pursuit with backup. A pause. "Nathan, we have a problem." "Tell me." "The man who went down," Webb identified him. "He's Carver." Nathan went still. Carver. The one who'd been at the Meridian, the operational center of everything Apex had run at them. "How bad?" Nathan asked. "Alive. Secured." A pause. "He's talking." That was unexpected. Nathan let himself process it for exactly 3 seconds. "What is he saying?" "He's asking for a deal. He says he has documentation. Communications between Forsyth and Hale going back 3 years. Locations of the data broker servers, names of the buyers." Her voice was careful. "He says he'll give everything in exchange for immunity consideration." The monitoring room hummed around them. The screens showed building systems data in scrolling lines, temperature, power load, HVAC status, all of it continuing its ordinary function regardless of what had just happened in the main hall. Nathan looked at Isabella. She had been listening. She was watching him with an expression that was hard to read and easy to feel. The face of someone who understood that what happened in the next few minutes would determine what the last 18 months of her life had been for. "Can you verify any of it independently?" Nathan asked Reyes. Not tonight. Maybe not for days. Keep him isolated. Nobody talks to him except you, directly and in person. No bureau infrastructure, no digital records of the conversation until you've verified the chain. He looked at Isabella again. And get us out of this building. I have a car at the East Service exit in 5 minutes. We'll be there. He hung up, put the phone in his pocket. His shoulder was making itself known with increasing insistence. He ignored it. Carver wants a deal, Isabella said. It wasn't a question. Apparently. Do you believe he has what he claims to have? Nathan thought about it. Carver was operational, not administrative, but operational people at his level often had significant documentation as a form of professional insurance, the kind of documentation that ensured that if something went wrong, you weren't the only one going down. I think it's possible, he said. I think Reyes needs to be very careful about how she handles it. If it's real, it fills the gaps in your evidence, the parts of the ownership structure you hadn't fully mapped, the buyer network. He met her eyes. It closes the case. She absorbed this. Something moved across her face, not relief, because they weren't at relief yet, but the preliminary sensation of a weight that had been held for a very long time beginning to shift. We need to go, he said. She straightened up, pushed off the equipment rack. She looked at his shoulder once more. When we're out of this building, you're letting someone look at that. Yes. I'm serious. I said yes. She almost said something else. She didn't. She moved to the door and waited while he unlocked it, and then they moved back into the corridor together, and Nathan kept her close and watched the angles and got them to the East Service exit in 4 minutes, which was 1 minute ahead of the car. They stood in the cold November air outside the Harmon Center's service exit and waited, and behind them the building's emergency response was fully in motion. He could hear it, the controlled noise of law enforcement doing its work, the accumulated consequence of the decision they'd made in Claire's kitchen 6 days ago. The car came. They got in. He looked at his shoulder as they pulled away, reaching across awkwardly to feel the damage. Separated, probably. Not dislocated, just stressed at the joint in a way that was going to be extremely unpleasant by tomorrow morning. He'd had worse. He'd had considerably worse. Isabella was looking out the car window at New York going past, and she had the expression of someone sitting very quietly inside a very large thought. He didn't interrupt it. After several blocks, she said, without turning from the window, I want to call my mother. Okay. Not from my phone. Use mine. He passed it across. She took it, held it without dialing. I don't know what to tell her, she said. You don't have to tell her anything specific, he said. You just have to tell her you're okay. She looked at the phone. Am I? He looked at her. The city lights moved over her face through the window, yellow and white. The same streaks he'd watched from the driver's seat of a different car a week ago when everything was still contained to one hotel ballroom and a single bad night. Yeah, he said. You are. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the phone and dialed. He turned to look out his own window while she talked, giving her the privacy of his inattention, and watched New York do what it always did. Move, press forward, refuse to stop for anything. Somewhere in this city, Carver was in custody. Somewhere in the Bureau's infrastructure, something was beginning to unravel. Somewhere in Vermont, his daughter was asleep. He thought about the photograph in the glove compartment of his truck parked back in Boston. He thought about the man in it and the night the photograph was taken and everything that came after. He thought about 7 years of quiet and what it had cost and what it had bought and whether the accounting balanced. He didn't have an answer yet, but the weight of it felt different than it had a week ago, slightly less like something he was carrying alone. The car moved through the city. Isabella spoke quietly to her mother. Nathan watched the lights. His shoulder hurt. He breathed. It wasn't over, but it was turning. Carver talked for 11 hours. Not continuously. There were breaks, legal consultations, the procedural pauses that Reyes insisted on because she understood that a case built on a compromised interrogation was no case at all. But across those 11 hours, in a room in a federal building in Lower Manhattan that had been selected specifically because it sat outside the Bureau's primary digital infrastructure, the man who had coordinated 2 assassination attempts against Isabella Sterling laid out the architecture of what Apex Defense Solutions had built over 7 years with the methodical precision of someone who had spent a long time knowing exactly where all the bodies were, and had finally calculated that the cost of keeping silent had exceeded the cost of speaking. Nathan wasn't in the room. He was down the hall in a chair that was slightly too small for him, his left shoulder wrapped and immobilized by a paramedic who had looked at the separation with professional sympathy and told him he'd need an orthopedic consultation within 72 hours. Nathan had said yes in the tone of a man who intended to think about it later, which the paramedic correctly interpreted as no. Reyes came out at intervals to brief him. Each time she came out, she looked slightly more like a person trying to contain something very large, the way you looked when a case that started as one thing was revealing itself to be something significantly bigger than you'd initially understood. The second time she emerged, she stood in the hallway and said, "There are names in his documentation that go beyond Forsyth and Hale." "How far beyond?" "Senior DOD appointees, 2 sitting senators, a former deputy director of national intelligence." She paused. "This isn't just contractor fraud, Nathan. This is an intelligence operation that's been running in parallel to official government function for the better part of a decade." Nathan looked at the wall across from him. It was a beige wall with a small scuff mark at about knee height, the kind of mark that accumulated in places where people moved through in a hurry. He focused on it for a moment. "Does Adrienne Cole know yet?" he asked. "I called her 40 minutes ago. She's on her way from D.C." Reyes leaned against the wall beside the door. She had the look of someone who hadn't slept and wasn't going to sleep, and had made peace with both facts. "She's been working this thread from the Senate side for 8 months. When I told her what Carver is giving us, she was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then she said, 'I knew it was bigger than what I had.' Is there overlap between what she has and what Carver's giving you?" "Significant. Her documentation fills gaps in his fills gaps in hers." She shook her head slightly. "And Isabella's evidence is the foundation that makes all of it admissible and verifiable. Without what Sterling built over 18 months, the rest of it is credible but circumstantial." Nathan thought about Isabella, sitting 2 blocks away in a hotel room that Reyes had arranged, with Dooley outside the door and Marcus inside, insisting on making tea from the room's inadequate electric kettle, the way Marcus apparently responded to all crises. He thought about 18 months of quiet, methodical work, audits and traffic analyses and encrypted backups, and the specific courage of a person who had found something that could destroy her and decided to document it rather than walk away from it. "She built the foundation," he said. "She built the whole thing," Reyes said. "The rest of us are just adding floors." She went back inside. Nathan sat with his wrapped shoulder in the too small chair and the beige wall, and he thought about foundations and what it cost to lay them, and whether the people who laid them ever got to see the building. He called Lily at 8, same as always. Marie answered because Lily was at the neighbor's house for dinner. Pretzel the dog and his owners had apparently become a fixture of Lily's Vermont life with a speed that suggested she had strong opinions about dogs and had been waiting for an excuse to act on them. "She's good," Marie said. "Really good, Nathan. She drew a picture today. A fox and a monarch butterfly, apparently as friends." "Together?" "She said they met in a field and decided to travel together." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll probably be able to come get her in a few days. Take the time you need." "Marie, I mean it. She's happy here. Don't rush back for her sake. Rush back for yours." A pause. "Are you okay?" He thought about 11 hours of testimony and a separated shoulder and a case that was growing into something that was going to reshape several people's understanding of how the world worked. He thought about the last 9 days and what they'd cost and what they'd moved. "Getting there," he said. "That's better than your usual answer," she said. He almost smiled. "Get her to call me tomorrow." "She'll call you at 7:30 and ask about the caterpillar. I'm warning you. I'll be ready for it." He hung up. Sat for another hour, then Reyes came out for the 3rd time and said, "Cole is here." And the next phase of the thing began. Adrienne Cole was 53, with gray-streaked hair cut short, and the bearing of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where being underestimated was both common and useful. She shook Nathan's hand in the hallway with the directness of someone for whom handshakes were informational rather than social. She looked at his shoulder. What happened to you? New York, he said. Harmon Center. Yes. I saw the preliminary report on the drive up. She looked at him steadily. You're cross. Yes. Reyes told me what you've been doing for the last 10 days. She paused. I'd say good work, but that feels inadequate. It is, he said, not unkindly. But thank you. She nodded once and went into the room, and for the next 3 hours the sounds that came from behind the closed door were the sounds of something being built rather than contained. The ordered, methodical assembly of a case that was going to do what cases were supposed to do when they were built right, which was survive. At 2 a.m, Nathan went to the hotel where Isabella was. He knocked, duly opened the door, looked at Nathan's shoulder, and made a face. 72 hours, Nathan told him. You've been saying that for 6 hours. It's still true. He went in. The room was the particular kind of hotel room that was clean and inoffensive and completely impersonal, the kind that existed in every city and none of them. Isabella was at the desk, laptop open, working. Marcus was asleep in the chair by the window, with his jacket over him as a blanket and his shoes still on. She looked up when Nathan came in. How bad? She asked. He understood she meant Carver's testimony, not his shoulder. He pulled up the second chair from the corner and sat across from her. 11 named individuals beyond Forsyth and Hale, he said. Senior government, former intelligence. A 7-year operation. He watched her face. Your evidence is the foundation that makes the whole structure stand up. She absorbed this. She was tired. He could see it in the way she was holding herself, the effort required to maintain the uprightness that came naturally to her when she had more reserves. But underneath the tiredness was something else, something that had been under pressure for 18 months and was beginning fractionally to decompress. It's going to work, she said. Not a question. Not quite a statement. Something in between. The careful declaration of someone who had been too disciplined to hope fully until now and was just beginning to allow it. The evidence is good, he said. Cole's documentation and Carver's testimony corroborate everything you found. Reyes is building a clean chain. If they do their jobs, they'll do their jobs. Probably. She looked at him. You can't just say yes. I can say the evidence is strong and the people working it are competent and careful. I can't say what happens after that because that's not something I control. She was quiet for a moment. Then, fair. He looked at the laptop screen without reading it. What are you working on? The public statement. For when the indictments come. She turned the screen slightly toward him. I've been drafting it for 3 weeks. I keep revising. He looked at the first paragraph. She had a clean, direct style. No unnecessary language, no hedging, no performance of outrage. Just the facts, laid out with the particular confidence of someone who had verified every one of them personally. It's good, he said. It's not done. It's good, and it's not done. Both things are true. She turned the screen back. You have a habit of doing that. Doing what? Saying 2 things at once when someone only asked about one of them. She looked at him. You did it with Lily. She's happy and she misses you. You did it with Reyes. The evidence is strong and we can't control what comes next. He considered this. I don't like incomplete pictures. Or maybe you like accurate ones, she said. Which is different. He looked at her. In 9 days he had spent more consecutive time in proximity to Isabella Sterling than he had spent with any person other than Lily in 7 years. And he was aware, had been aware for some days now, in the carefully compartmentalized way he handled things that weren't relevant to the immediate problem, that she was someone he respected in the specific, uncommon way he reserved for people who did hard things without making them into performances. She had been scared every day of the last 9 days. She had done the work anyway. She had not asked him to make her feel better about it. She had asked him to help her do it, which was a different request entirely, and one he found he knew how to meet. He was aware that he was thinking about this more than the immediate situation required. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to need you functional. I'm fine. You've been awake for... Nathan? She said his name in the tone of someone ending an argument they hadn't started. I'll sleep. Give me an hour. 1 hour, he said. He stood up. His shoulder registered this with a sharp reminder. "I'll be outside with Dooley." He went to the door. She said quietly, "Thank you." He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. He thought about what to say to that. There were several true things he could have said, and most of them were complicated, and none of them were what she was actually thanking him for, because she was thanking him for the basic, irreducible fact of having stayed in the room when he could have left. And he didn't know how to explain that leaving hadn't actually felt like an available option, not because of training or obligation, but because of something older and less organized than either of those things. "Get some sleep," he said, and went out. The indictments came down 19 days later. Reginald Forsyth was arrested at his home in Northern Virginia at 6:15 in the morning by a team that Reyes had coordinated outside the compromised bureau infrastructure, in conjunction with Cole's Senate investigation and a DOJ task force that had been quietly assembling for the last 2 weeks. Victor Hale was arrested simultaneously in D.C. The two sitting senators named in Carver's testimony were served with subpoenas the same morning. The arrests happened across 4 time zones in a window of 40 minutes, which was the kind of logistical precision that came from a lot of careful preparation and a significant number of people deciding on the same day to do their jobs correctly. Nathan learned about it from Reyes, who called at 6:45. "It's done," she said. He was in his Boston apartment. He'd been back for 10 days. Lily had come home from Vermont a week after New York, arriving with a drawing of a fox and a monarch butterfly that she insisted go on the refrigerator, and with a relationship with her Aunt Marie that appeared to be ongoing through a dedicated texting channel that Marie had set up specifically for this purpose. The apartment had readjusted around her presence the way it always did, filling back up with the small sounds and disordered energy that he hadn't noticed were missing until they came back. He was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee when Reyes called, and Lily was still asleep, and the morning light was coming through the window at the angle that meant it was early enough to be quiet. "All of them?" he asked. "Everyone named in the primary indictment. There'll be more. The Buyer Network investigation is ongoing, and the Senate side of this is going to take months." A pause. "But the core of it is done. Forsyth, Hale, the operational structure. Apex Defense is going to cease to exist as a government contractor by end of week." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the light on the table. "Isabella's testimony is scheduled?" he asked. 2 weeks. She'll be the primary public witness." He could hear something in Reyes's voice that he recognized as professional satisfaction. Not triumph, just the particular steadiness of someone who had done a hard thing correctly. "She built an airtight case, Nathan. 18 months of work. It's going to hold." "I know it will." "How's the shoulder?" He had, in fact, seen the orthopedic consultant. "Separated AC joint, grade 2. A brace for 4 weeks and physical therapy after." He was currently wearing the brace, which Lily had decorated with 3 small stickers of various animals while he was asleep, which he hadn't noticed until he was already in public. "Being treated," he said. "Good." A pause. "For what it's worth, the things you did over those 10 days, the way you built the parallel track, kept her moving, got the evidence to Cole cleanly. None of the rest of it works without that. Isabella built the case, and you kept her alive long enough to use it." A pause. "Not the same thing." He thought about that. "No," he said, "not the same thing." They hung up. He sat with the coffee. Outside, the city was doing its morning things. Down the hall, he could hear Lily moving, the specific sounds of a 7-year-old waking up, which included a sustained period of not quite awake sounds that were somehow louder than the awake sounds. He got up and started making breakfast. She came out at 7:20 in the yellow star pajamas, hair in the condition it always achieved after sleep, and registered the smell of eggs with the approving expression of someone whose standards were clear. "How many?" he asked. 3. "You can't eat 3. "I can try," she said, climbing onto her chair. He made her 2 and himself 2, and they ate at the kitchen table in the morning light. And she told him about a dream involving Pretzel the dog and a submarine, which was elaborate and internally consistent in the way her dreams always were, and he listened and asked questions in the right places, and the eggs were slightly overcooked because he'd been thinking about something else when he should have been watching the pan. She didn't complain about the eggs. He looked at her across the table, at the dark eyes that were her mother's and the way she concentrated that was apparently his, and the person she was in the process of becoming, who was someone he was not yet able to fully see but could feel the shape of, the way you could feel the shape of something solid in a dark room. And he thought about what the last 10 days had cost, and what the 7 years before them had cost, and whether the accounting was something that could ever fully balance. He didn't think it could. He didn't think it was supposed to. Some things you did didn't cancel out other things you'd done. They just became part of the total, and the total was what you were, and what you were was something you had to keep deciding about every day in the small, ordinary decisions that didn't feel like decisions at the time, but turned out to be the ones that mattered. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "What are you thinking about?" "The eggs," he said. She looked at her plate. "They're a little overcooked." "I know." "They're still good." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "They are." 3 weeks after the indictments, Isabella called him. Not from the personal number on the back of the business card, from that number which he'd had in his phone since the first night at Clara's house, and which had become, over the weeks, the number he associated with the specific quality of her voice when she was thinking something through rather than performing thinking. "I want to offer you something," she said. "Formally." "You already hired me formally. Reyes has paperwork." "That was emergency paperwork. This is a real offer." A pause. "Chief of Security for Sterling Cybersecurity. Permanent position. Full authority over physical and operational security, team selection, protocol design. Salary that isn't what the Meridian Grand was paying you." He was in his truck, parked outside the grocery store, because the conversation had come through while he was about to get out, and he'd stayed in the cab to finish it. "That's a significant position," he said. "You're a significant person," she said. "Not a compliment, a fact. I don't have a resume that matches what you're describing. You have a record that more than matches it. I've spent the last 3 weeks talking to people who know what you did in the Navy. Not everything. Some of it's still classified, but enough." She paused. "You're exactly what I need. You understand threats from the inside. You think architecturally about security. You don't panic." Another pause, shorter. "And you care whether it actually works, which is rarer than you'd think." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the parking lot outside the windshield, the specific American ordinariness of a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, carts and SUVs, and a woman loading bags into her trunk with the efficiency of someone who did this every week. He thought about the Meridian Grand, the service entrance at 6:52 p.m., the cart, the badge, the way he had built a life designed to be invisible, and the way that life had been, if he was honest with himself, a kind of suspension, not living exactly, but maintaining, keeping things safe, waiting for a future he hadn't been able to see clearly enough to move toward. He thought about what Lily had said on the phone from Vermont. "I know you're doing something important." "It would mean Lily changes schools," he said. "Is that a deal breaker?" "No, she adapts fast." He paused. "Better than I do." "The office is in Boston," Isabella said. "You wouldn't have to move, though the salary would make a better apartment possible, if you wanted." "I don't need a better apartment." "I know you don't need one," she said, and something in how she said it made clear that she understood the distinction between need and want, and was not going to push on it. He sat with it for a moment. Outside, the woman finished loading her bags and pushed the cart to the return and got in her car with the clean efficiency of someone who was on to the next thing. "I have one condition," he said. "Name it." "I build the team from scratch. My selections. No inherited personnel, no external pressure on hiring. Done. And if I think something is wrong with a protocol, even if it's yours, I say so. I would expect nothing else." A pause. "Nathan, I'm not hiring you to agree with me. I'm hiring you because you're the person who tells me the true thing when every other person in the room is managing my feelings about it." He was quiet for a moment. That's a specific thing to know about someone after 10 days. "It was a specific 10 days, she said. He looked at the parking lot for another moment. Then he got out of the truck because there were groceries to get, and Lily had requested the specific brand of cereal that was always on the top shelf. And some things didn't pause for significant professional decisions. "I'll come in Friday," he said. "We can discuss the details." "Friday?" she said. He heard something in that single word that he filed away carefully in the same compartment where he'd been filing other things about Isabella Sterling for 3 weeks. Things he wasn't ready to look at directly yet, but that he was also not pretending weren't there. "See you Friday," he said, and went to get the groceries. The testimony happened on a Tuesday, 14 days after the indictments. Nathan was in the room. Not as a witness. His own formal statement had been given separately, in writing, vetted by Clara, and processed through Cole's Senate channel. He was in the room because Isabella had asked him to be, and because he'd said yes. She testified for 3 hours. The room was a federal hearing chamber with cameras and a full press presence, and approximately 40 people whose entire professional purpose was to listen to what she was saying and understand its implications. She sat at the table alone, no legal counsel beside her, which had been her choice. Clara had offered, and Isabella had said she'd built the case herself and she was going to present it herself. She was precise. She was comprehensive. She answered every question directly, including the ones that were designed to be hard, the ones from the members who had relationships with Apex or its adjacents and were managing the slow collapse of those relationships in real time. She didn't perform anger. She didn't perform righteousness. She presented the evidence with the same clean directness that Nathan had seen in the first paragraph of her public statement, the quality of someone who had thought about what she wanted to say for a very long time and had finally arrived at the moment of saying it and found that preparation and clarity, when you had both, were sufficient. Nathan sat in the second row and watched. He thought about what it meant to do the right thing in a situation where the right thing had significant costs. He'd thought about this, in one form or another, most of his adult life. Not as an abstract question, but as a practical one, the kind that presented itself in specific rooms at specific moments and required an answer before you had time to fully think it through. He thought about the night at the Meridian Grand and the moment he had looked through the narrow window in the service door and seen the geometry of a room about to go wrong. He hadn't thought about it then. There had been no thinking, only the immediate, practiced response of a body that knew what it was doing. But he'd thought about it since. About the choice that wasn't quite a choice, about the things that pull at you regardless of what you've decided to leave behind. He had spent 7 years trying to leave behind the person he'd been trained to be. He had thought that was the right thing, to build a small, safe, ordinary life for his daughter, to remove himself from the world that had taken things from him and from others, to be a janitor and a father, and nothing more complicated than that. He didn't think that anymore. Not because the quiet life was wrong, it wasn't, and the parts of it that were about Lily were the most right thing he'd ever done, but because silence, in certain situations, was its own kind of participation, because looking away wasn't the same as being uninvolved, because what he knew and what he was capable of were things he carried whether or not he chose to use them, and using them in the service of something true was not the same as being the thing he'd been afraid of becoming again. Isabella finished her testimony at 2:14 in the afternoon. The room exhaled. The cameras kept running. The chairman said something procedural that Nathan didn't track, and Isabella Sterling sat at that table with all her evidence in the public record and every fact she had spent 18 months documenting now part of the permanent, unfalsifiable account of what had happened, and she looked like someone who had set down something very heavy and was still feeling the shape of where it had been. After the session cleared in the corridor outside the chamber, she found Nathan. He'd been standing against the wall, old habit, back to solid surface, clear sightline to exits. She came out of the chamber with Marcus behind her and 2 of Reyes's people flanking, and she looked at Nathan across the corridor, and she looked like herself. Not a performance of herself, just herself, tired and clear-eyed and present. "Good," he said when she got close enough. "Was it?" Every word. She stood next to him against the wall while Marcus handled the post-hearing logistics with the assistant who'd been coordinating the press statement. The corridor moved around them with the particular organized chaos of a federal building after a significant event. Staffers, journalists, lawyers, all of them in rapid motion toward whatever their next thing was. "Is it over?" she asked. He considered the honest answer. The emergency is over, he said. The work isn't. The network they built is still being mapped. The buyer investigation is going to take another year, probably. Some of the named individuals will fight their indictments for a long time. He looked at her. But the thing you set out to do, getting the evidence to the people who could act on it, getting it into the record, that's done. And it'll hold? It'll hold. She was quiet for a moment, then, my first day of work when I was 23, fresh out of grad school, first week at a security consulting job I'd fought very hard to get, I found an anomaly in a client system that my supervisor wanted me to ignore because fixing it would complicate the existing contract. She paused. I documented it anyway, got a formal reprimand, almost lost the job. She looked ahead at the moving corridor. I've been doing some version of that ever since. I know, he said. I used to think it was stubbornness, she said. Now I think it's more like, I can't not see the thing once I've seen it. I don't have the capacity to unsee it and carry on. He understood that precisely. He understood it in the bone-deep way of someone who had the same inability, had spent 7 years thinking it was a flaw, and was in the process of concluding it might be the opposite. That's not a bad thing to be, he said. She looked at him sideways. You have it too. I know. Is that why you stayed? He thought about it, honestly, in the way she'd asked honestly for the entire length of this. Partly, he said, and partly because you were doing the right thing and somebody should have helped you and I was there. Just proximity. No, he said, not just proximity. She held his gaze for a moment. Then Marcus appeared at her elbow with a tablet and a list of press questions that needed pre-approved responses. And the moment passed the way moments passed when real life reasserted itself, which was abruptly and without regard for what was happening. Friday, she said as she turned to go. Friday, he said. He watched her walk down the corridor with Marcus talking beside her and the 2 security people flanking. And he thought about foundations and the buildings that got built on them, and the people who laid both. He thought about Lily's drawing on the refrigerator, the fox and the monarch traveling together. He pushed off the wall and walked toward the building's exit. Outside, the day was the specific cold, clear blue of November in D.C., the sky the kind of color that made everything look slightly more real than usual, buildings and people and streets all vivid against it. He stood on the steps for a moment. He called Marie. How's she doing? He asked. She wants to know if Pretzel can visit Boston. He almost laughed. Tell her we'll talk about it. That's a yes, and she'll know it. Tell her anyway. A pause. Nathan, how did it go? He looked at the sky. He thought about 11 hours of testimony and a separated shoulder and a parking lot in Boston and a drawing on a refrigerator and a drive to Vermont with a sleeping 7-year-old in the back seat and a woman who had refused to look away and a version of himself he'd thought was gone but turned out to be just waiting for a reason. It went, he said. It actually went. Marie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Come home. He thought about home, what it was, what it had been, what it was still becoming. The apartment with the old radiator that knocked, and the refrigerator with the drawings on it, and the fire escape where the pigeons still arrived with opinions. The city he'd chosen for its size and had stayed in for its rhythms. The girl with her mother's eyes who told elaborate stories and concentrated like her father, and was, in the specific way that children were, the argument for everything he'd ever done. I'm on my way, he said. He went down the steps. He did not have a perfect life. He had a separated shoulder and a truck with a dead GPS and a new job that was going to require him to build something from the ground up in a field where the threats were real and the work was never fully finished. He had a daughter who was going to grow up knowing that her father had a past he hadn't fully explained, and who would eventually ask questions he would have to figure out how to answer. He had whatever was happening with Isabella Sterling, which he was going to have to look at directly at some point rather than filing it in a compartment and pretending the compartment wasn't there. He had all of that. It was complicated and incomplete, and in several places still actively under construction. He thought about what he'd told Isabella in the hotel room in New York. The end isn't the part you plan. The end is what happens when all the planning runs out. He'd meant it as a caution then. He understood it differently now. It wasn't a warning about insufficiency. It was something else. The acknowledgement that life, the real kind, the kind you actually lived rather than the kind you held in reserve waiting for the danger to pass, happened in exactly that space where the plan ran out, and you were left with just yourself and what you'd decided to be. He'd decided. He walked to the rental car in the parking structure 2 blocks from the Federal Building, got in, and started the drive back to Boston, back to the apartment and the knocked radiator and the drawing on the refrigerator. The drive was 4.5 hours. He made it in 4 because the roads were clear and he was ready to be home.